right, you guys ready to go here? Yeah. All right, let's call the meeting to order. Thank you, everyone. Dan's going to be 15 minutes late. He's coming back from up north, and Jackie won't be here tonight. She's a conflict on the meeting. Thank you for coming. So we'll do public comment, and to start with, and before moving into public comment, I'll just remind everyone in the audience and we have a meeting norm for our committee. But the chair will solicit and recognize public comment when appropriate. So we're going to have more public comment later in the meeting after we talk about some items, especially after we talk about, I think, SU and SD. We'll talk. Oh no, excuse me. I put one in after some other items we're going to discuss. And so the committee will also refrain from dialogue, was another part of our meeting norm. So, it's don't feel bad for not engaging you, but it's the precedent that we set. And I'm sure in school board meetings you've heard that's a meeting in the public, not with the public. So thank you all for coming, and just get an idea of how many people would like to speak tonight. Okay, good. So we're going to go about 15 minutes, and the time you don't use, you can yield to. So it's Oliver, and your name, sir?
Ross Harmon.
Okay, and Ross, and so you guys, you'll speak for about 5-10 minutes, probably, and
yeah.
Same with you, Oliver?
Yeah, probably
okay.
about 10 minutes, yeah.
Okay, all right, so, all right, great. So would either one of you like to go first?
I can go first.
All right, thanks.
Where would you like me to stand?
Right there.
You're right in front of the camera. Do you have your makeup on? You're right in front of the camera? You can come, I don't know, come around here by, yeah, wherever Herb. Do you guys have this? Okay. Sorry, I lost stuff. Go ahead, Ross, yeah.
Good evening. My name is Ross Harmon, and I'm a teacher at Meadowee Community School. The teachers that have joined me here tonight, and I appreciate the time you've given us to speak about our hopes for our school. Our commitment to giving our students and community the best educational opportunities has left us concerned over our possible future. We know that the Northshire Merger Committee has been dedicated to finding their own path through this process. The teachers at Meadowee have been following the work being done by our own merger committee and have realized that we are now at an important crossroads. The teachers, staff, and students at Meadowee have all benefited from the organizational structure that the BRSU has offered. Unfortunately, Act 46 has put us in a predicament that we feel jeopardizes our future relationship. The teachers in our school recognize the challenges that we all have moving forward. We acknowledge one of the significant factors that affects our community is where our students go after they graduate from our school. We sympathize deeply with this important consideration, but also understand what is at stake for our school if we're excluded from continuing with the people, professionals, and organization that we've been connected to for so long. The professional development opportunities, curriculum work, and the system is in place to allow for collaboration and sharing of information have been the keys to our success. The availability of teacher leaders, math and literacy coaches, the behavioral specialists, and many volunteers have been so important for us and our students. Our time working collectively in horizontal meetings, leadership committees, and professional development initiatives have allowed us to develop, confer, discuss, and evaluate our practices. Our special educators and speech-language pathologists have teamed with the BRSU special educators to select interventions that are effective for students, analyze data, understand details relating to special ed law, and support each other's work with students with complex disabilities. We've all benefited from this collaboration and would like to make it clear that we wish to continue this invaluable working relationship. We realize the decision to form a school district or supervisory union is complex, and there are many factors to examine before a decision can be made. We respectfully ask you to consider these thoughts, our existing history, and collaborative relationship that has been fostered over many years of serving together with the goal of helping all our students. We would like Meadowee Community School to remain a part of the BRSU through inclusion in the Northshire merger as your community community moves forward with the plan to the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to let you know, I had a few emails from Meadowy teachers, and I shared them with the committee before. I got them today, and I shared them in the past few hours. So if you'd like to submit that to me, I can share.
I have a couple copies.
Yeah, sure. And I can do it electronically too, and it might help Sonia as well.
I can certainly send it along to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
I think like 5 or 6 copies.
Oliver.
Thanks. So I would share my written comments, but I don't think you'd be able to read my handwriting. So, quick introduction. I'm the state representative. I represent Jamaica, Londonderry, Stratton, Weston, and Winhall, so a number of towns in the mix here. I'm also, in full disclosure, I am a member of the Burton Board of Trustees, and I serve on the governance committee on that board. That being said, just to be absolutely clear, I wanted to get that disclosure out of the way, but I'm not speaking on behalf of BBA in any way. I just wanted to make that disclosure. I'm also a parent of 2 children at Floodbrook, and a third will be at Floodbrook in the next couple of years. So I'm really here as a state representative and as a parent to provide a little bit of the statewide policy and political context for you to consider, some thoughts to consider, and a few recommendations specific on the question that you guys are facing around whether to go down the SD route or the SU route. So I think, just a little political context to keep in mind. We, as a region, we enjoy school choice at the high school grades. It's something that's valued. I know from feedback that I hear from constituents, and employers and other leaders in the community, it's highly valued. But less than 10, we need to always keep in mind that although there are 90 plus towns that have school choice, less than 10% of the student population in Vermont is actually in one of those towns. So we are a definite minority. And we also need to keep in mind, although school choice is really familiar to us, it's an alien concept to people outside of Vermont and people even inside Vermont who haven't grown up and aren't familiar with these districts. We have a lot of legislators who grew up in other states, came to Vermont as adults, live in towns that don't have choice. This is a very alien concept to them. So it's something that we tend not to really understand, and we always need to keep that perspective in mind. It is school choice nationally is an ideological issue, and there are definite fault lines on this. And there's a lot of really bad information, and a lot of people who are pulling in data and experiences and preconceived notions from out of state into Vermont, and it's becoming part of the political process, and it has over the last several years. So this is all kind of leading to growing opposition to choice up in Montpelier. I voted for Act 46 as a legislator, and one of the reasons that I was able to vote for Act 46 was through a negotiation. I was able to strip out all of the anti-school choice provisions. There were some very specific things in there that would have definitively limited choice that we were able to negotiate out of the bill as part of a compromise. But that being said, the Vermont School Boards Association has taken a very hostile position on the issue of school choice and independent schools in particular. The State Board of Education, as many of you already know, I won't go into detail, they are taking up a number of measures that have the effect of undermining school choice. There are a number of pieces of legislation that have been introduced over the years. One, seemingly innocent, would limit tuition payments to out-of-state students. It's really a stalking horse for much grander objectives. There's been a bill that has been introduced and reintroduced with a growing number of sponsors to flat out prohibit the payment of tuition to all independent schools, period. If that bill were to come into law, Long Trail, Burton, etc., would no longer be able to take students with public dollars. There's a candidate running for lieutenant governor who, during his time in the legislature, literally introduced a bill entitled An Act to Repeal Public School Choice. This is the context that we are operating under, and I want you to keep this in mind. So Thoughts to consider. I think number one is you're thinking about this decision, what's best for our kids? That's number one. The second thing is protecting school choice, and related to that, preserving our regional school choice ecosystem and maximizing the catchment area of the students within this ecosystem. And when I say ecosystem, I'm broadly defining all of this region, the towns that are sending students to Burton, Long Trail, and a variety of mainly independent schools, some public schools on the periphery, but mainly independent schools. So maximizing the catchment area, maximizing economies of scale to promote cost efficiencies. So these are a few sort of guiding principles, if you will, that I would encourage you to think about as you're making this decision. So some of the threats, I kind of provided a very quick overview of the political context that we're operating in. There's been a lot of discussion about further consolidation down the road. This a legislature cannot bind a future legislature. So, as soon as a new legislature is elected, new things can happen. So we need to be thinking about if there was further consolidation, how would that happen? There's been discussion, for example, when people are talking about limiting choice, there's been discussion about limiting choice to within a supervisory union or a supervisory district. So I would really encourage you to think long-term and strategic. This is not a decision you should be thinking about for the next few years. This is a decision that you should be thinking about the impact it's going to have over a generation. This is a long-term decision. You need to be mindful of everything that's going on around us and the long-term trajectory that we're on and some of the threats that we're facing. So with that, I would strongly recommend that you go down the supervisory union route as opposed to the SD route. The challenge with the SD route is you are minimizing your catchment area. You're leaving several towns outside of that catchment area. They will, if you go down that path, they're going to have to find a home somewhere else. And while they may have choice today in that new home, my fear is that a future legislature could come around and say, you know what, you're within this other supervisory union, you have to go to one of these schools. You can no longer go here. So if that were to happen, we have now reduced the student population that our schools are serving, and when that happens, that impacts our towns because our schools that are serving our students now have fewer students, and with fewer students come fewer resources. So it's going to put incredible cost pressure on our towns. It's going to put incredible pressure, downward pressure on the services that our schools can deliver. The second
Sorry, 10 more minutes.
Yep, I'm wrapping up.
Thanks.
So the second recommendation is that you design a supervisory union around a 9 through 12 choice paradigm. Do not allow an operating high school district to come into the SU. Again, because of long-term politically where we're going, you don't want to get into a situation where you're consolidating and all of a sudden they say, well, you have a public high school. That's going to be your school. So I'll close there and I'll stick around if you guys want to ask questions after the main event. So thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Okay, we have one more minute. Anyone else in the audience for public comment? Thank you for sharing. Moving forward, the minutes from last meeting, and one thing that I saw in there, Sonia, thank you again. And maybe I said a poor memory, but with the second page where it says the list of the issues to be resolved before a vote on whether merger is advisable. That third bullet point, preservation of school choice. Did we?
Yes.
Was that something that, I feel like that's already resolved, that we're going to preserve 9 to 12 school choice?
It had to do, with, as I recall it, with several items. First, high school choice, which is the element of the DRSU at this particular point, and all of either the schools that would be included in a supervisory union, with the exception of Arlington. And we spoke about the fact that we wanted to preserve specifically school choice 9 to 12, even if we opted for a supervisory union, which would include Arlington,
But
because it has a high school.
I know, but what is the issue? Like, what are we to resolve though? That's what's confusing me because there's either way we're going to go 9 through 12, and there's no 9 through 12 school choice. So I'm not.
I think, were we wondering for exactly what Oliver was talking about for clarification as to what would happen down the road? Should we include a district that has an operating high school? Is that what we were?
I think that was a question mark that we had, but I think it's, Dan can help us with this one, but I see no.
I think it was around the issue of what it was down the road, and is one structure or the other more likely to help preserve the choice? That's what the question was.
Okay. All right. So we'll come back to that. Yeah, let's keep the minutes as they are as far as that point goes. I guess I don't recall the context in which that was brought up. It's good enough share for it. Yeah. Right? And Dan too?
Then I move the acceptance of the minutes.
Okay. Would anyone like to second? Seconded. Any further discussion regarding the minutes? All those in favor of adopting the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the motion carries. Moving on, some quick reminders that we have the financial models. Those are sent out with Wells and without Wells, excuse me. And Susan gives a quick update on that in a second. There's not much really to update. And then Jim and Jim's wife were nice enough to get us those flyers for us to distribute. And so please let us know if you have trouble printing those and distributing those. And thank you,
They were wonderful.
Jim and your wife. Appreciate it. That's great. So no other reminders that I have right now. So why don't we move on to the next piece of business, which is our discussion with Red or SU. And if I could have Sue, why don't you give us a quick, you can give us a quick update on that new financial model, and then we're going to hear from Dan and his, we've got some new guidance from the state, which might actually clarify some things or not. Thanks, Sue.
So she sent out a couple of new pages for the SU model, excluding wells, just like we had prepared it last time, just took out what we estimate the cost to be for just wells. We had, I think, added 1.4 counting altogether for the SU model, so I took out 0.4. We had a 1.5 positions in for OTPT, we took out a 0.5. We had 2 directors in, we took out half of a director, and we had 1 psychologist in, and we took out half a psychologist. So keep in mind, these are all estimates of us just trying to figure out what we might be able to get away with without having wells in the mix. And also keeping in mind that wells is farther away, takes a little longer to travel and provide those services, so those FTEs might get a little higher for that district in and of itself. After doing that, you can see the costs for the Northshire district go up because your share of the costs go up. You no longer have the ADM from wells in the mix anymore, so you're at 66% instead of 61%, I think it was. And because you're paying more special ed costs, then you have higher special ed reimbursement. So after you shift all that around, it comes out to pretty much the same tax rate. It's a very, very similar tax rate. So I didn't prepare a new comparison sheet because really it's not really a material difference for you. So that's where we ended up.
Thank you for doing that. That was,
Sure.
and previous models, excellent. Dan, can you just an update, as from the paraphrase the guidance from the state as far as, what it seems like a kind of a fluid situation in that there's some new guidance, as far as I see it, about this SU and Red decision.
Yeah. Well, good evening. Sorry I missed your last meeting. Hope you found the financials informative. On the behest of Jackie Wilson, your superintendent, who contacted the state, Mrs. Donna Russo-Savage, who's the attorney at the State Department who deals primarily with Act 46 now. And Jackie's request is more or less, can we get some guidance on SU versus SD, before we get much further into this. I was not optimistic we would get clear guidance, and that's pretty much what we got. Basically, Donna's not in a position to speak on behalf of the state board, so she did just highlight, the considerations that are in the law. Basically that, as you're well aware, the SD is the preferred governance structure under Act 46, but there's also language in the law that talks about the state board being required to consider geographic isolation and the whole region as part of putting this together. So I've been thinking more about it, and just to give you some advice on where you are in the process. I think you all are now pretty well acquainted with what an SD is versus what an SU is. Basically, they are the same thing, except an SD only has one district and an SU has multiple districts in it. But this idea of supervisory unions they're administrative structures really for the state's convenience and the state board's convenience to administer school districts in the state. So under the law, a district is either assigned to an SU by the state board or is designated an SD. It means it's large enough to be its own SU. But either way, the state board controls that. So the first way to think about this is that you as a committee really don't control whether you're going to be an SD or an SU. Okay, in terms of that structural piece.
But
Ultimately,
we are obligated to make a recommendation.
Yeah, so you're going to make a recommendation, but the state board is going to decide it. And you're not really going to know what they're going to decide until you get through the process. Just to back up and hold that thought for a minute, but under Act 46, we'll come back around to talk about the incentives that are under Act 46. Really, the only incentives left now, like I said, last year we had these incentives for accelerated merger, which was the preferred governance structure, the SD happening under some certain conditions, and mainly it had to happen last year. It had to include all districts in your supervisory union. And the incentives last year were included at 10 cents, 8 cents, 6, 4, and 2. Now there's only two types of incentives. Those are for a red, which are the old Act 153, 156 incentives, 8, 6, 4, and 2, or forming a preferred governance structure, but not in an accelerated manner, and also not necessarily requiring all districts in the supervisory union that were required under the accelerated option last year. Those incentives that are still available for that type of merger are exactly the same as the red incentives. So, just back to your decision making, I was thinking that really you're going to, assuming you're going to vote at some point to do a merger, what we're really talking about firstly is that you're not going to know whether a state board's going to qualify you as an SD or an SU. Is that ambiguity enough for you not to vote for merging? That's sort of a decision. Is that the lack of certainty going to be sufficient for you to say, I don't feel comfortable voting for a merger unless I really know what the outcome of that's going to be? So that's sort of one way to think about the decision-making point. The other one, back to the incentives, assuming that you'd want to pursue getting some incentives, you're more or less guaranteed to get them if the voters vote yes prior to July 1, 2017, because you qualify as a red. This thing is still going to be a red, regardless of whether the state board designates it an SD or an SU. On the other hand, if you want to hold off and really make sure that this is an SD and throw all your eggs in that basket, so to speak, after July 1, 2017, you have more time available to you. But the state board could deny your merger as an SD, and at that point you wouldn't have any incentives. So let me just sort of recap. So
Say that again. It's going to be still going to be. I think it's important people.
Yeah.
Still going to be a red.
Trying to lay this out to you. There's a couple. It is confusing. So you have firstly the definition SDSU. That's really something the state board's going to designate at some point, right? They're going to say this merger is either going to be. It is big enough to stand on its own, but the state's also going to then say, is that a good idea for the region? And you're not going to know what the answer to that question is until after you submit a plan to the state. So in your plan, you would be evaluating both of these options, and you could certainly express your strong interest in being an SD. And you could certainly put in a strong interest in being an SU. And even if you express a strong interest in SD, you're probably going to want to put in some language about the SU issue for a couple of reasons, which we'll talk about, because this district, if in an SU, would be substantially larger than the other districts in the SU. So we have this issue of SU board composition. So bottom line is, and the way I think I pitch it to you is that you're not going to know which way the state board's going to vote on this issue of SD versus SU. So is that lack of certainty on the part of the state board sufficient barrier for you not to vote for a merger here? That's sort of the first sort of
Can I ask a quick question?
question.
When you talked about voting for the merger, you meant within this group,
That's
not,
right. This
okay, not when it
committee-
goes to
right,
the
this
broader
committee-
voting community. Okay, that's where I was
This
getting a little
committee's,
confused.
sorry, this committee's decision of, is it advisable, yes or no? Okay? Not having certainty on that issue at this point, is that sufficient for you to say, I can't vote for an advisable merger because I don't know what the state board's gonna do? What you should know is that the voters will know before they vote.
That's what I wanted
Okay,
to
so
clarify, right.
if you say you vote, yeah, it's advisable to merge, we're gonna create some sort of merger here. We're gonna create a red, we know that. It's our preference to be an SD, it's our preference to be an SU. You're gonna include all that in your report. The state board, say the state board signs off on it, even one way or the other. The state board is going to indicate what's going to happen as part of that vote. And the voters will know, say the vote's in March, the voters will know the full implications of what's about to happen. They will know this thing will be an SU, this thing will be an SD. You won't know as part of deciding whether it's advisable to merge or not, but the voters will know before they vote on it.
But, yeah, so, just more, in Donna Russo Savage's email, one thing I took from it is, you know, even if they approve our, we say SD, we won't really want SD, and they approve that, they could still change it down the road. You know, they could
Down the road,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so the state board has the authority over SU composition. And so that's, we talked about, I think, a couple of meetings ago about probably, you know, let's say one of the downsides of the SU is that later on you could have other districts assigned to you involuntarily, because the state board constantly has the authority to do that. I mean, these statutes are fairly old. We haven't seen the state board do a lot of that kind of stuff. But in this context, and we've seen in the last 10 years or so, the commissioner being very active about pushing districts into sort of, you know, making you do a study to even have a superintendent anytime there's been a superintendent vacancy. So, yeah, certainly at some point, the state board could say, yes, you are an SD. Later on, the state board could say, you know what, now we've got a new situation, we're actually going to make you an SU. So that convenience is really up to them.
But one of the questions that we asked, and perhaps you can do this, there are actually several questions that we asked. The first question was, if we petition for an SD or an SU, could we down the line change that with another study committee?
Yeah, so I wouldn't confuse merging school districts with this idea of SU versus SD. So you're going to merge these districts if you decide to do that. And let's say you merge these districts, you create one school district. It is a red if you do that prior to July 1, 2017.
Okay.
The state board is then going to decide, is this thing, should it stand alone as an SD or should we make it as part of an SU? The state board could decide one thing this year and say, yep, you're an SD, we'll leave you as an SD. 10 years from now, the state board could say, some things have happened around you, now we're going to regroup you into an SU.
Okay, so it's up to the state.
Yeah, what the state
Ultimately.
currently can't do is merge districts into each other. So, you know, we expect the state at some point to get that authority. It's sort of implied or inferred under Act 46. But the state board, it's very clear in the law, the state board controls the composition of supervisory units. What they can't do is force merger of districts, but they can reconfigure supervisory units as
So-
they see fit.
So in our model, economic models, we first included Wells and then,
Right.
as we heard tonight, as we suspected, took them out. But in our model, Arlington and
Right.
the SU would most likely be included,
Well, I think you
is what the assumption is.
I think you're doing your due diligence and doing a study. You know, this is a merger study committee. So what you're going to display in your report is your study and your analysis and your thinking, pros and cons. And if you're going to make a case that one thing is better than the other, you should have data in that report to inform your decision. You know, like we've looked at the financial models, we've therefore decided this is the better way to go. We've looked at the educational impact of doing this, you know, and you can display that in your report.
And the last issue was we got hung up, and I've read all of the laws that you sent us, and they seem to be remarkably wishy-washy in terms of any kind of analysis that I could do, but I'm not a lawyer.
You saying
are a lawyer.
SU board composition?
Board composition. For us, in the model that was proposed to us, the financial model, of the SU, we would have the preponderance number of students. And many of us, when we began to hear that, and Jim, you were particularly concerned about that, and Jay and I quickly jumped on board, and the whole group got concerned. Can we, if we opt for an SU, have appropriate representation? Because the issue in our districts was the idea of having a degree of control that exists currently in each of our separate districts. And we don't want to lose that issue of active control. So, in our recommendation, can we legitimately come up with a recommendation that will likely be viewed favorably by the State Board of Education that gives us appropriate supervisory union representation?
Yeah, I think you're, I don't know where you are in your deliberations on this issue since last time, but I'll just propose a model, a hypothetical model. Let's say that this committee agrees that the SD is what they want to do, right? So you're going to produce a report, you're going to have your analysis there, pros and cons, your conclusion, and SD is the way to go. I think it would also be prudent of you at that point to also do analysis on the SU side to say, we looked at it, here's what, we've concluded on it, it's not our preference, but if the state board is so inclined to do that, we have a major concern in terms of representation and composition. Therefore, we would strongly, the authority to do this next part really resides with the SU board, but we would suggest that a waiver is going to be necessary to configure the composition. And I say waiver, there's a standard configuration of an SU board, which is 3 and 1. 3 representatives if you operate at the school and 1 if you don't. I would go even further, just based on my experience with the Red and working with Winhall. The state board really appreciates if you work it all out ahead of time. So I would suggest that you could say, we'd have the SU board request a waiver, and oh, by the way, we've talked to Arlington, Winhall, and Sandgate, and we've come to agreement on this being the optimal configuration. If a waiver were granted by you, this is what the representation would be.
Right.
So I would go as far as to say, work that out ahead of time with your neighbors of the likely SU board members, so that the state board doesn't have to do some of that homework.
There is provision for a waiver.
Yes, there is.
So,
Or a better question,
Yep.
And do you know, has the state ever granted such a waiver?
Yes.
How often?
I would say often, but when there's been a case, I think the one that percolates often in our region is down in Bennington. SDSU has a waiver of their composition that gets reviewed periodically.
Well,
There's been all kinds of waivers granted on SUs. My experience with this has been, for the last 10 years, I would say I can remember St. Johnsbury being a standalone SU. They are a K-8 operating district with choice 912. Technically, they don't qualify as an SU, but I remember my experience with that as being that the state board, for the last 15 years or so, always really strongly deferred to locals in terms of what they wanted. They didn't really interfere with that a whole lot. But it's a different era now, so they're going to be, as you know, they're pushing new rules, they're promulgating new rules to guide themselves in making these decisions. I suspect they would be very pleased if the locals could come to agreement on this, as long as it conformed with what the law suggests in terms of appropriate, one man, one vote kind of principle. So what you would be producing is a study of the pros and cons of doing this, but I would, if the SU option is, and I think it is going to be an option for you due to the geographic situation, that you would be well served to be proactive and articulate out what that solution might look like.
Jim?
well, I was going to go back. I wanted to let Dan finish. I was going to go back to a question I think you posed to us, which was, given all the ambiguity and no guidance on the SUSD, would we still, would that preclude us from making a vote on, is it advisable to merge? I appreciate you bringing that up. While I don't like, that's kind of a lousy way for us to go about it, but it seems to be the reality.
And I don't, in fairness to them, I don't
Yeah.
the question for them is like, how would you answer the question before we posed it?
Yeah.
You know, so
But I
they can't know what's in your report.
Right, and I think for us, just to answer what I'm thinking, you know, if we said no, we can't vote on that would just kind of leave us in limbo and shut down the committee, and I don't think we want to go that road because
That's
we're
where
left
you-
with nothing.
I think,
Yeah.
you know, I sort of distilled that down to be a decision-making point for
Yeah,
you.
no, I
because
agree.
If you didn't know that,
Yeah,
but I think the other side of that is you would have, I think, some assurance that the voters would know.
yeah.
I can't imagine
Yeah.
the state board not indicating in their
Right.
vote how this would work
Yeah,
out.
well, I wanted to
particularly if
just
you had done
answer
some
what I was
research.
thinking on that issue.
There-
Moving forward.
There are no study committees active right now in these, you know, in these surrounding districts, right? So
Well-
who do we engage? Do we engage?
Yeah, you've engaged with everyone around you. I mean, I
As far as
suspect-
SU board
as you know,
composition.
Jackie tonight is meeting
Yeah.
with Paul and Rupert, I believe, so they're about to consider launching another one. I think Arlington doesn't need to launch a study committee. You know, their position is essentially waiting to see what you do. They're not looking to merge with anyone, so they're not going to do a study committee. They, at some point, would petition for SU reassignment. The only other one in the region that's, you know, sort of out there is Winhall and Sandgate. We know right now, I believe Stratton and Searsburg are going to pursue formally a merger. I don't think we've received formal confirmation of that, but we think that's true. So Winhall and Sandgate, they're basically in a holding pattern as well. I mean, they could vote at any point to start a merger study.
But if, you know, we're on the clock a little bit here.
Right.
And if this is an important question to us as far as SU board composition, right? And we want to kind of figure some things out
Yeah.
around with our neighbors, right? We should do that.
Right.
But if there's no active study committees, right, is it the school boards we go to?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, we would work with
That's-
them
yeah.
and try to figure that out a bit, because I think, once again, for your due diligence, that might look really nasty as a model. And that, or if you say SD was, and I'm not sure it is, but say SD is where you want to go, that model might add an argument for you. To say, look, you know, we kind of looked at the SU, financially it isn't compelling, educationally it's compelling, and moreover, we have this real representation issue due to the mismatch of the sides, you know, and here's how we could work it out, but that's incredibly dysfunctional and doesn't serve the policy interest of Act 46 in terms of being a sustainable structure.
So suppose we, just responding to what Oliver suggested, suppose we decide we'd really like to have an SU that solidifies our 9-12 choice. Do we need to include Arlington?
You essentially don't have control of it.
Right, but if we make a strong case that we're,
I think that's the best you can do, is to say, here's why.
Mhm.
You know, I would say part of that is going to come from financial analysis. Part of it's, you know, if you look at the policy requirements of Act 46, I mean, I think you should try to answer those questions in a objective way and see if your conclusion comes back to say, well, you know, SD is the best way to do that. I think part of that is looking at the analysis of that SU board. That's going to be an important variable. Because on the other side, the SD, one of the arguments of the SD, as you said, controlling your own destiny and having that. Clearly, the SU doesn't provide that. So to what extent does it not provide that? And I think that part of that answer will come from an analysis of the board composition. So we can model that out.
and we could model it with or without
We
Arlington.
could model it with them, without them, with their cooperation, without. I mean, it's just a financial or a numbers model. I think we should engage in a conversation with them about, you know, here's what it would look like. Because the waiver ideas, you know, basically under the law, you know, the default position is an SU is comprised of each district that operates the school gets 3 representatives. If you don't, you get 1. And then there's this opportunity for something else. That something else implies that you have to work it out among your neighbors at best. And that's what I think, you know, we would look at. The standard would be something around population of the communities or number of students in each district, that sort of approach.
And
How would you react to a hybrid type of approach? If we were persuaded as a group that an SD is really the best way to go for the educational benefits and the efficiencies that we found in it, could we not also say, taking into account our geographic reason, that those districts that are contiguous to us geographically should they desire down the future to join our district and their town voted so, we would be open to coming into our district. Not talking about unions, we're just talking about
Right.
district.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's all part of the argument you can make. I mean, certainly you know what's involved with that. That means, you know, Win Hall and Sandgate would give up school choice, K through 8, to do that. And Arlington would stop operating a school, you know, 9 through 12. Those are significant changes for those districts to consider. You can put all that into your argument. I think, you know, another argument would be to the state board, if you vote to put us in SU, our voters are going to vote this down, you know, in March. You know, they're going to vote down this merger. State board might say, okay, too bad for you. Now you're not going to get any incentives because you're going to be back at it after July 1 trying to form something, and now the incentives are off the table because you lost your opportunity to do a red. And we're going to make you an SU.
To Ed's point, when this process first started, we met in this building, and one of the first questions, Dan, when you were superintendent, you posed to the 3 largest districts were, you're big enough to do an SD on your own, do you want to go there? And we unanimously concluded, no, we don't. We want to include everybody that wants to be in this future district. So I think in a lot of ways, we already did that. I would certainly keep the door open as well. Now, there were reasons why Paulette and Rupert and Win Hall didn't join us in this committee, and that was obvious. So I think that, and the reason I'm bringing this up, I think this gets, in my mind, to the geographic isolation specifically, is we did address that issue in my mind when we made that step.
Yeah, I think, you know, back then, you know, my responsibility to pose that question was really in the context, are you going to form an accelerated merger?
Yeah,
Because you had a limited time to do it that year. And the definition of an accelerated merger
Everybody
is SD with
had-
every single
Right.
district in the SU. It's the only way you can go through that hoop.
Right.
So if you were going to say yes or no at that point,
Right.
you know, it was a critical juncture because we had limited time to do that.
Right.
On the other hand, now you've studied it more. You know, it's a different context. Now we're looking at the red frame. Your neighbors have gone
Right.
off and looked at things, so it's a different context.
Okay.
I have 2 questions, Dan, about changing SDs. Going back, did you say that even after the state board hypothetically approved our SD, it could still come back and say to us that we had to change it?
Yeah, so think of SDs, there's 2 things that sit under that. One is you have a district that's merged, but the other thing is an SD is a supervisory unit. I mean, that's the technical definition. The S part is a supervisory unit. It's a supervisory unit. It's one district, but it's also, from the state's perspective, serving as a supervisory unit from an administrative standpoint. So maybe the way to think about it is to think of the BRSU as it is now. At any point, there's 2 ways the SU board structure could change. One is any single member district could petition the state board, the voters of that district could petition the state board for a modification of the SU. The other option is the state board on its own authority could just say, we're going to change your SU. So those 2 provisions in the law exist, whether it's an SD or an SU. The state board, at its convenience, can reorganize the composition of SUs.
My other question was, once we had, let's say we had an approved SD, does Act 46 give a mechanism for us to change the composition of that SD, adding other districts, for example?
Yeah, so in that case, we're really talking about a merged district. Forget about the SD title. Let's call it the red. So you formed a red. The voters have...
Well, no, my question was, assuming we formed an SD, can we then add to it?
You can't form an SD. The state board can
Well, all
designate
right,
you to
yeah.
be an SD.
Right, okay, but
Yeah.
once that happens, then can we, the new SD, add to the new
And
SD?
expand it as an SD.
Yeah.
I think that really gets to the question, can the state board force districts to merge? And currently the answer is no. But
That
let's...
wasn't the question.
But
I guess, but could you list someone, let's say before the vote maybe, could you, you know, after the report and maybe before the vote, could you add on another advisable district, right? Let's say, or just sake of an example, Arlington, right? Could we tack them on that report later on as an advisable district in this new merged
They could
district?
be listed as an advisable, that's my point. is
Yeah.
Forget about the SD concept,
Yeah.
just merging these districts. Arlington could certainly be listed as an advisable district. Okay, that gets to a whole other can of worms about
Yeah.
advisable versus necessary. Their voters could vote. If they were to vote on that, meaning the state board had approved the plan, let's say the state board approved plan was this district was going to be K through 8 operating 9 through 12 choice, Arlington voters could be listed as an advisable district to that merger. I think Herb's point was getting to, if you had this thing is an SD and it's one school district, right? That's the definition of an SD. Can other districts be put into that configuration so there's only one district? That requires a merger of districts. Currently, the voters are the only entity that can do that. But it's implied or inferred, I think, in the end of Act 46, in 2019, that the state's going to have this plan for the pieces that are left over. And it's inferred, I think, that the state board or the AOE, somehow they're going to have some authority to merge districts. And so that's uncertain at this point, I think, would be the best answer.
Dick, and then.
How important is geographic isolation? The reason that I asked that is both of our speakers, and we sort of expected some kind of comment from Meadowy, because
I missed that.
That
Yeah.
they might, if we went SD, be particularly isolated. And we were told that politically, by Mr. Olson, that geographic inclusion rather than exclusion is an important piece. So how important is that in the approval process that we're going forward? Because if we create an SD of just the 9 towns that are sitting at the table, it certainly creates isolation. And for some of our districts, Sunderland, who sends some students to Arlington, that may present a serious problem. So how important should this committee weigh this principle of geographical inclusion?
Very important. I mean, everything we're hearing up and through this week is that this is going to be a significant hurdle for this committee to address. If you don't address it, it's going to be really challenging to form an SD. I think the state board is articulating rules. They have to go through a rulemaking process. This is going to be really the year 2 process of Act 46. This is going to be the first time this standard is applied to a certain extent. Everything we're getting from the state board in terms of political signals is this will be a primary criteria for them evaluating this set of mergers that's coming forward. So I think we have to, and my advice to you is that at this moment in time, forming an SD or getting an SD approved by the state board is going to be very unlikely. That would be my political read.
Next, that geographic isolation clause is right next to it, if I'm remembering correctly, there's a mention of socioeconomic status, correct? Or something to do with, isn't there language about, geographic isolation in the context of, the free and reduced lunch population?
They are going to create some rules, some guidance for how they're going to interpret and apply this provision of the law. And the rules are in draft form, we can look at them. They're trying to do their best to signal, to Dick's point, this is a very important criteria. Okay, so woe be to you who don't pay attention to that, because it's gonna factor significantly in their mind.
Yeah, I guess my question is, since Arlington is a higher FRL rating, right?
That gets more complex. I think
that's
at this point,
that's a factor though that they're looking at.
I don't know how they weigh that or not, but I think it's fair to say they're gonna look at that pretty significantly right now. We're going to get increased guidance from them. I think, the rules are going to take some time, but they are working on, as they start to work with committees like you, we'll start to get, some feedback from them on what they like or what they didn't like as that goes forward. But I think, right now, I was working with Paul and Rupert at Wells. I think, there is a path forward up there for districts, but since Meadowy is currently attached to the supervisory union, I think it does raise a question, but I think the bigger concern is Battenfield Valley supervisory union, which the state, has had some question about its viability in terms of its size, not in terms of functionality, but in terms of its size. So I think as part of any regional solution, that the status of Arlington and Sandgate is a...
Well, I just want to read to everyone. This is Section 8 of Act 46, evaluation by the State Board of Education. This is subsection A, subsection 2 here. It says, this is for the state board, the guidance. Be mindful of any other district in the region that may become geographically isolated, including the potential isolation of a district with low fiscal capacity or with a high percentage of students from economically deprived backgrounds as identified in another statute here. And so that's, so I don't know, what is the FRL rate of Arlington? And, you know,
I don't think, you know, I understand where that language is coming from politically. It comes from Act 156, you know, which was the sort of tweak to 153, where, you know, this idea of phenomenon of a donut hole where, you know, affluent communities were intentionally sort of going around poor communities. I don't view Arlington being exceptional in that regard. I see it being as socioeconomically contiguous with this region. I don't. You know, I see it more being about them operating a school K-12, not being like you're saying, they're poor and we don't want to deal with it. So I don't, you know, that's a different animal.
I'm just, is the state mindful of economic advantage or disadvantage? Yes.
So last time we met, we came around to preferring the SD for the reasons of transparency and how nice it would be not to have to worry about anybody else but us. But over the week, I've been thinking about it. I also met with our select board last night, and one of the representation was a thing that bothered us, but it appears that there's a likely chance we could get a waiver to fix that.
I think
right.
it would be challenging.
And even if we didn't, you know, most boards, as we've found here, we're all thinking about all our kids, and even if we had a smaller representation on that board, I'm optimistic that the board would, you know, would not be only concerned with the interests of their own towns. But the other thing we were concerned about was that the superintendent would be totally devoted to our issues. But in the SU model, there's the addition of another assistant superintendent. So in the budget, so there'd be another person the same way we have now, where Jackie took Floodbrook, you know, whoever the assistant, that responsibility would be shared, and that we wouldn't see, you know, we wouldn't be shortchanged on attention from the superintendent. But the other thing, the two things that our school, that the Weston Selectmen said, was they really want to preserve school choice. That's a really high priority. Weston closed its school board in high school in 1920. That's almost 100 years ago. So, you know, that's a long-standing tradition, and they don't want to mess with that. But the other thing they said, when we looked at the cost of making an SD, and then I asked Sue to clarify it for me, because it's a smaller unit, then the costs are spread, the fixed cost of running an SD, the superintendent, the special ed, the transportation director, you know, running an office, all that stuff, are spread over a smaller number of students, and it raises the tax rate. So our select board wasn't, you know, they didn't see that was in the spirit of Act 46 to add another layer. And to think about adding to costs when in our district anyway, we know that costs have gone up as a consequence of becoming a red. So we'd be looking at, you know, we wouldn't be looking at savings. We wouldn't be addressing that issue, that clamor that we hear around the state. So I'm inclined to say we should do an SD.
I think, you know, just to bring you, I think the deliberations though, I think my analysis stands up, and your decision-making point is, you get to that point, is this something you're not going to know, basically?
Right.
Okay, so it's not really within your authority to choose one or the other. You've done your due diligence by studying both aspects of it. You're going to have some nice financials around it. You'll have some educational rationale. Not knowing, is that going to be an obstacle for you to vote advisable or not to merge? I mean, that's really how your decision-making point is going to come. You're not going to know the definitive answer to that.
Right.
And you can certainly, how we write the report, you know, I draft it out, you guys will put emphasis on certain areas, you know, what do you prefer, you know, those kinds of things you can do in your report, but you're not going to be able to decide the issue.
No,
so it's
just, I think, a few more clarifying questions, then I think it's important that we kind of move and discuss with each other and what we're thinking. So Meg, I haven't heard from Meg yet, and so.
Dan, I was wondering, two quick questions. One is, are there currently any mergers that have been approved where the state board has designated an SU of the not preferred structure? And then are there current mergers that were approved by the state board that include both that are SUs that include school choice and a high school, and also operating high school?
Yeah, the answer is yes to both. I mean,
Okay.
last year, all of the accelerated mergers by definition are SDs.
Right.
So they, and it's interesting, the state board has indicated, those were, I don't want to say, use the word simple mergers, but the state board's been indicating that what they required to do those mergers is not going to satisfy their requirement for these other mergers, because these are more complex. So they're pointing to, I was sharing with John, the recent merger with Addison Northeast, which is Bristol, Vermont, and the merger that was proposed for the islands. They're pointing to those reports as sort of being the standard. They'd like to see these reports going forward look like. So last year, yes, they were all SDs. We've had other mergers that weren't SD in history, and we've had mergers recently that were SUs, where they were alternative governance structures. Or I should say, modified union school districts where you had some with different options side by side. So, yeah. And those, all I could take away from that, if you read them, is the state found the regional solution to be acceptable, in terms of complying with Act 46. It was, it satisfies the situation. It's sort of the best solution. I think, my interactions with the state board over the year regarding our region, they're going to look for some sort of solution with Battenkill Valley and BRSU, that issue being resolved. They're not going to let, through all this huge process, they're not going to let that stand as a simple issue.
Do they see the Battenkill Valley as our issue to solve, or?
They're hoping that this regional, when we say I think the regional would come up with a solution. They don't want to, try to resolve it. I think they would be just as happy if they went south, as long as something happened, they'd be happy.
And can they do that?
They can certainly dissolve Battenkill Valley. They could dissolve the supervisory unit very quickly. It's a question of how the merger part would go forward,
So any questions? Something we haven't heard yet? New point? Go ahead, Ed.
Given the State Board of Education, we know, does pay attention to the opinions of local communities, despite what people say. I think we're in a good position to take some leadership here, a significant way in which we present to the State Board and pay attention carefully to our entire educational geographic region, and be as open and inviting to these other districts to become part of our district, and include that in our vote. So we've already voted, and the State Board doesn't have control over it, but they could be pressuring one of these smaller districts that, we want to stay in the SU. It says, well, you've got this district here, all you have to do is you can get into it, but you've just got to vote to join it. If the law doesn't change and they can't dictate it.
Radically change their enrollment option.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
issue.
You say give up choice.
But we also need to pay attention to what we think is best for our kids,
Right.
and be as open as we possibly can to these other districts, and so that we're meeting our responsibility in how we present this and how we do our due diligence. That's bound to influence the thinking that goes into having some influence when the State Board is making their decisions about possible isolated districts.
So there's nothing, I would like to hear for us to discuss this now. I think we've got a lot of clarifying questions. I think it's also important to remember that this issue does not go into the article language, right? SU, whether you say SU or SD, that's nothing but the article language. It's going in the report, okay? So we have, where we have the most control is over the article language. So that helps me to kind of distill the decision-making process. But if we can, I guess my question I would like to hear from a variety of people, if we can get some, clarity. That seems like from the last meeting, the biggest hang-up for us was that SU board composition that would be underrepresented based on our population. If we can, do we feel like if we can get some clarity on that, or if we can get better representation there, provide maybe a waiver, do we feel that, do the SD gains, are they still large enough, or is it negligible, and then an SU is better? Go ahead.
I guess I'm thinking that the reason we seemed to go to SD was more for more control. that we weren't sharing things. We were determining our own destiny. We were setting up what the special ed, the transportation, we had our own people running it for all of us sitting at the table, as opposed to the going to be in the SU again, unless I'm still confusing the two things. But in other words, then the SU administration, we'd be paying back in again our share into the BRSU, as opposed to determining our share and knowing what our tax rate could be. Or I think it was a matter of local control was the thing I remember that outweighed. Even now it's looking like the financials are the same, what Sue says. So financials are now not as much an issue as they were.
No, I don't,
No.
no, the
I thought that's
financials
what
aren't.
Sue said.
No.
With
Maybe.
wells removed,
Yeah.
it's
With-
similar.
Wells
It's
removed.
not the same as an SU versus an SD, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Well, I thought that's what Sue was
No.
saying by taking
No.
the wells out.
taking wells
Well,
out.
taking wells out left it the same
at
As
the
it
S-
was
That's
with
what's
them
before.
in.
as
previous
with
models.
them in, because
Right.
other
Wasn't-
things shifted. I'm
Right.
sorry, I
The S-
misunderstood
yeah,
that completely.
The SD was the one that costs an extra 550,000.
And right, and we were justifying
Right.
that the local control was a big deal, and then the other bad part was the lack of balanced representation if we went the other route. Is how I was remembering.
I guess furthermore, do we need to have clarity on the, engage in with the other districts to have some, before we can make that SU,
My
on the SU board
feeling is that's
conversation,
going to take a lot of time and effort,
Yeah.
and we did that on this committee. I think we came to a great solution with Dan's guidance, and we all agreed with it. But boy, that to me is going to add a lot of complexities to our discussions and our time that we could be using to focus on these other issues that the district is going to have to face regardless. So I'm not so eager to jump into that conversation right now. I
You mean
think
just-
it's
you
a
mean
great
yeah, I don't think.
potential solution,
Yeah.
or path if we go down there. But I'm not eager to rush out and do it right now, because I think we've got a lot to cover in the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, I guess my point is, do we really have that much to figure? Our decision doesn't really matter a whole heck of a lot.
That's what we're gonna be discussing.
And so, should we be focusing on other matters? And in the meantime, reach out and get, because the biggest hang up for us, it seems like, is this SU board composition, and get some clarity from, I don't know how we do this, but clarity from Arlington, Paul at Rupert, and
But I
say,
guess I'm confused because
I-
as Dan
I
said,
don't.
like, that's not even our decision whether
Exactly.
it's SD or SU. What we need to focus on is it advisable to merge?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the first decision making. I mean,
Yeah.
if you guys feel like that's not gonna cut it, like you can't determine, if you can't vote yes because of this issue, that's an important consideration. If it's not a barrier, that would be a good thing to identify
Yeah.
tonight. I certainly would work with Jackie and the other superintendents in the region to start modeling, because I think you should include that in your report ultimately, that contingency, here's what, we would be looking for a waiver, and here's how we worked out together as a region, do all that homework ahead of time, but,
yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to get to is this is not going to be, a deal breaker. Or is it a deal breaker?
Yeah.
Do we really need to make this decision?
But I think we can make the decision. And what I'm hearing, and Nancy summarized it rather well, that I saw the table shift dramatically. Jay even said, I was thinking SU, and then the discussion went on. I was shifting over to SD. Obviously, Deborah had the same sort of thing. I've been
No, the other
wrestling.
way.
Well, you came back, but you're back now.
But
You were there.
what I'm saying is, I think we can make a decision, and I am prepared to say, just to either take a straw vote or a
Yeah.
formal motion, but I think this issue of control is, in fact, a deal breaker for me, and therefore, any kind of discussion would need to include, if we went SU, the waiver of that board construction.
Jen?
I think we're all in agreement
Yeah.
with that. I think it's, again, back to Dan's point, it's not our decision ultimately to be an SD or SU designation. It's, are we gonna merge? That's
Yeah.
where we're
And you're
at.
saying you can't make
Jack?
a decision without knowing.
So yeah, so that's, I've been thinking this all night. It's it doesn't matter, is what we're saying. It doesn't matter what we vote, so why are we even talking about it? Is it a deal breaker? I mean, it can't be a deal breaker, because if it is a deal breaker, then the state's going to do what they want to do anyway, and it doesn't matter whether we recommended it or not. What's going to happen is going to happen regardless of what we say. So I think the only thing we should really, and I question if our recommendation, if our recommendation doesn't fit into what they need, then our recommendation is meaningless to them. So I think the best thing we can do is, and I agree that it'd be too much time to talk to our neighbors to figure out what a proper SU board composition is, but in the end, our vote, we're just going to be forming a red, and that SU board composition will likely fall as a decision to be made, and filing for a waiver will likely fall on the next board to do. I mean, because we don't know before the vote what we're gonna get, so maybe we should just create something, a structure that we would like to see the SU board to be, and then just put that in a recommendation and then be done with it. Because after that, we don't have really any say in the matter.
I think the only article language off of that, the only article language where this is pertinent that I can see is, last week we talked about the smaller towns, could they get muscled out and on the SU board, right? So do we want to have some article language, or can we even, that addresses that, the smaller towns are guaranteed one spot on the SU board or something like that. So that's the only way I can see that this discussion can affect our articles. And with that said, right, do we just, does anyone have any thoughts? Yes.
Again, I think tonight is the first night it has become crystal clear. All we're doing is the legwork for the state. I mean, we're a study group. We have studied it long and hard. I think we've done good work, and I'm not willing to accept that our work has been for naught, and therefore throw up my hands and say, why are we going to do this? Because they're going to do what they want. I think we should continue to proceed to agree that we're going to merge, or if that's what we can do. And then once that's done, let's put all the pros and cons and why we're doing SD. I don't think we should give up SD if we can really get language that suggests we should, with all the reasons we didn't want SU. And then after, like you've been saying, if SU becomes our assignment, then here's how we would work it, and maybe we'll have time to talk to Arlington, or maybe that's what we look at things. I mean, I think for Sunderland, the biggest issue with Arlington would be is if we lost high school choice, but Floodbrook, you don't want everybody to come all the way over to Arlington because we have a high school in that district, and Arlington's not going to be able to give up their high school because they don't want the choices that are left. So it just feels to me, I think we just need to proceed as we've been doing, and just realize, or at least I'm realizing now, this is a study group. We're not really we're making a recommendation of what we'd like and hope they'll buy it.
So I'm going to ask that we do move on pretty soon here, and then if we come to some kind of consensus, whatever it may be, so we can move on.
Where I kind of get confused when we're talking about SU and SD is when I look at Act 46. It says the preferred default structure, the place you start from, if you can do it, is the SD. Okay. If you're going to move away from there, it's not a simple process the way I read it. That you need to come up with a long list of strong arguments where you're going to move towards an alternative structure. So I get caught up because I haven't yet seen that long, strong list for us to go in the SU direction and away from the preferred model. So again, I'm looking at, I hear that there's potential guidance coming, but all I really know is what the law says. I'm not a educator or a legal scholar, but it's here on my paper in front of me, and it says if you can do it, you have to start from the SD model.
And it sounds like the issues are going to be because we'd be great, but we have these little pockets all around us that aren't going to have anywhere to go.
Is that a strong enough issue to pull away from the preferred structure, though? That's what I'm questioning.
That might be why they don't accept our preferred structure.
It seems like that's the preferred model, but it seems pretty evident that the state is going to want us to be an SU. Yeah. So we need to work on what the state wants us to be. I mean, yeah, they say in the law that they want to be an SD, but I don't see them accept
I
it.
don't accept
Well,
that.
it's
No, I don't
bullshit
either.
isolation.
How about this?
Yeah, I don't
You know,
accept
we
that
do,
either.
I do want us to get to the grandfather clause and some other things tonight.
Yeah.
And does it, you know, we developed this list of those 6 things that we wanted to really get to before we, to get to advisable to merge or not. Is this off the list now? Because essentially, is this going to be the deal breaker for anyone? Is this, if we take this off the list, then we can proceed and circle back around to it, as Nancy was saying. And I'm sorry, I feel bad because there's a lot of people who want us to make a decision, but
I think-
are we really making a decision?
I think that's a great question, but we have to recognize there are other districts that are looking at us to make this decision. I mean, I listened to the Arlington School Board meeting last week. They're waiting for us to make a decision on this so that they can explore what options that they have. So I think we need to give some guidance to the rest of the community as to what we're doing, instead of.
I think you could consider what you're going to indicate as your preference.
Okay.
Right.
You know, that you could word it that way. In our report, we're going to emphasize this as our preference. Our analysis indicates this is our preference, and that's about the best you can do.
Can we just vote whether we're gonna merge or not? I mean, can we get that off the table? I just wish we could just
Or do you feel like we're
resolve
ready-
something.
like
Well,
now?
no, or let's do a straw poll, or if anybody who doesn't, who's opposed, then can just express
John,
what they need.
One of the things I've been thinking about is like, it's similar to Nancy, like, the red, what I feel like we haven't done recently is to really identify what are the pros of just being the red. And I know there are the financial considerations that are on everybody's mind, but there are so many educational opportunities that we talked about at that very first meeting that I feel like we've kind of lost when we've gotten into all these
Yep.
technical pieces. And that just might help us to see the benefit of the red, and then those benefits of the red will still be there whether we're a district or will they still, it's a kind of a question, are those benefits still there if we're a red within a supervisory union? I think that might be helpful.
Yeah.
And what are those benefits? You know,
Right.
how,
And
do
how
they
will
go
we
away
lose
if
them?
we're in a red? You know, do we lose?
Right, does the benefits of the red, if we voted to merge, that went through, but then we ended up in a supervisory union structure, are all those benefits diluted by then that next level of governance?
I apologize for being a disadvantage because I only joined last meeting, but have we figured out what the educational cost of a red would be, and have we figured out what the bylaws of a red would be?
Well, the model that Sue did for us last time said that a red would be significantly more expensive because the fixed costs of running a supervisory union would be spread over a smaller population.
And
Last
SD?
time,
SD.
last time
SD
was
would be.
SD.
SD.
Yeah,
Yes,
SD,
we
right.
spoke, yeah.
Because we would have to have our own superintendent, our own.
What I'm asking about is the cost of a red.
Well, red.
Oh,
I haven't seen that
Yeah, we
in
did that
the
sort
old
of
papers.
initially. We did some educational stuff, and we did some initial financial look at what the tax rate would do.
August 6th.
right.
Some of that now is really more represented in the the full SU model, because what we did initially was basically just, let's throw everything in one pot, let's merge a district, and let's see where the tax rate does. It
Right.
moves to the mean. And that was based on assumptions that we didn't, like the SU was going to stay the same, and everything was going to stay the same.
So I can
No,
show
that's
you
not
where that
true.
is. too.
Yeah.
I can- yeah, I
But
can
the
show it.
educational stuff, the financial stuff now, the educational, I think is being brought up that was discussed in an earlier meeting, and it's certainly something you have to, go back and revisit.
So Nancy,
And is the assumption that whatever bylaws you've discussed for
bylaws.
SD would be the bylaws or the incorporation for a red also?
You will be
exactly the
drafting
same?
those bylaws as a committee. We've been sort of going through a template of stuff, so we haven't produced that draft yet because it's sort of predicated on you deciding you want to merge or not. But that would be, that's something we're working on, is drafting it out.
so does anyone have a recommendation for how we should proceed? We heard from Nancy, it's good.
I would just suggest on Nancy, if she's poised to make a motion, it isn't warned for tonight,
Yeah.
so it might be premature, just in the interest.
Yes, but I don't think,
Right.
yeah, I wouldn't say, but not the, no, I wasn't talking about the advisable or not.
Oh, okay.
I'm more talking about proceeding beyond the red and SD. Richard,
Yeah, just
and then Jen.
Just listening to everyone's opinions, I think we really need to move off this SD red issue and start moving some of the other issues. I just don't think that this is productive right now. That's all I'm going to say.
Jen?
Yeah, I just need to have clarity on grandfathering.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, good.
are we ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay.
Do we want to do a straw poll at this point to give the public some indication where the committee currently is?
I think we need more discussion.
Yeah.
I think, and I personally, I've kind of come back the other way as far as similar to Deb, and more for me, it's been the institutional knowledge of the BRSU, right? That's kind of the hidden cost I'm concerned about. Is there some way that we lose this institutional wisdom? And Medway kind of spoke to that a little bit tonight, and that's for me is like is there more information that are going to come up from the state or something that if there's something in the next like if this is something we don't need to decide tonight, right? Are we?
Right.
Right.
That's fine. I just think, because you're right, all these other things, either way we go, these grandfather and all the other policies have to, we have to take a stand on them.
Yeah, and we have to get to the articles,
Right.
right? And this is not article language.
Right.
So let's, any final thoughts before moving on? Okay, so why don't we take a quick break and come back and we'll start at 7:25. What is that?
We'll find some motion here.
All right, we'll get started. We're missing Jeff and Dick, but we'll get started. So the next piece of the agenda, process for developing article and report language. This shouldn't take too long here. I hope not. Is that that piece is just this idea that in the memo I put that link to Dan's recommendation, and this idea of rather us drafting the language where we get bogged down, that we agree on some the concepts in the articles, and then we leave it to Dan to draft those concepts. So can we agree on? Is anyone opposed to that?
You would still approve the language.
We would still approve the language.
Just so you don't get caught up.
Caught up in wording.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to. We'll get hung up all night. So does that sound good? Yes. Okay. So moving on, as long as no one's opposed to that, moving on to grandfather clause, and I put some guiding questions on there just to get on the memo to get us thinking. Necessarily don't have to use those. And Dan, you had a recommendation on there as well, correct? On your, you just said need a conceptual motion, hopefully tonight. That's one of the goals of the meeting tonight, to pass a conceptual motion. And so I guess one of the questions for the committee is, what is the ultimate goal of the grandfather clause? Is it to provide educational continuity for the student, or is it student-centered, or is it family-centered? So we all agree that the educational continuity for the one student, right?
Right, that's
Okay, so
absolutely.
then we agree on that. So moving beyond that, are we considering the logistical hardships of the family? What is the goal beyond the educational continuity of the grandfather clause?
I wanted to ask Dan, because I saw an email that you mentioned that you didn't, about how amenable the state would be to a policy that is centered on family convenience.
Well, yeah, I think the issue, this what got me on the issue of how to proceed on drafting the language. It's easier, just out of my convenience to get an idea of what you want to do than I draft something, as opposed to already working with something you've kind of had put together. But I think one of the things I noticed from the deliberations from 2 meetings ago was the issue of grandfathering families as opposed to grandfathering students. And I think the language works better if you talk about students as opposed to families. There's a number of reasons why I think putting it all on families is problematic, because families, the definition of the family will change as it goes forward. But I think it also it conforms closer to the law if you talk about students, resident students, because that's all the definition of a legal pupil is really the issue you're dealing with, and where they can go to school, and are they resident pupils, that kind of thing. It's really about the students, not so much about the family.
Jen?
I just have a question in regards to that. Could there be any part of the language that would state that a family would have the option to petition to the new board because of hardship that they request that their siblings, the siblings of the child who's been grandfathered, can remain at the same school for that
Yeah.
option. Is there anything we could do in that way?
I don't think so, because the way the law reads now, I mean, the situation you're talking about is a school district that operates a school. Does the board have authority to provide tuition to that student to go somewhere else when it operates a school at those grades? My understanding of the law, and we've had some direct experience with this in UD 23, there's only one exception, and that has to do with geography. So, the way I think it works under the law is that the voters, you have to have voter permission to tuition students out of the district. So when you don't operate a school, you have to get voter permission to do that. So the voters have authority over that to control the cost issue. So in a case where you operate a school and you're seeking to tuition students out of the district, the voters kind of have an interest in that decision, so they've given school boards one exception to that under the law. So the board on its own authority can do that, but only in this consideration of geographic convenience. It's like where the family lives relative, and usually what that means is, like, you think of a town that's like a long rectangle, maybe like the shape of Kansas, and you got a family that lives on, the Iowa border, and the school's on the Nebraska border, and they have a right or an opportunity under the law to petition the school board and say, this would be more convenient for us to go to the school next door. But even in that case, the school board can say no. But that's the only exception I'm aware of under the law that allows the board to do that without voter authority.
Jessica? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just say it's just an interesting question, because if it was in the Articles of Agreement, then would that be the voter authority?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what
Well,
I'm
going
getting
to
at.
the geographic piece, I have a good example. So, like, currently, I know of a family that technically lives in Mount Tabor, but to get to DMV or Mount Tabor, they actually have to drive to South Wallingford
Sure.
and come back around and
Yep.
head up through where that would be. That's right now she doesn't have busing, anyways, but but that would be like a geographic.
Right, so that parent under the
Possible.
law might have a case to go to the, they could do
They
it
might.
anyway, even if they didn't. But yeah, that's what that provision's about.
Jim?
I just wanted to clarify, when I think about the grandfathering, I think there were two kind of issues. One was making sure that student in the transition who's in 7th grade doesn't miss the opportunity to go to 8th grade in the school.
Right.
So I had the feeling like everybody was on board with that. So maybe we can just put that piece aside unless it, and get the language and say that, like, that's okay. And then the second piece was this other issue that I'm still not, again, clear on, grandfathering other siblings. And I know I'm not opposed to it. I definitely want to consider or continue the conversation. I understand why it's being done, but it's a financial issue, and we're not creating a budget for the rest of this district. So I do think we need to quantify it in some respect, how many students we're talking about and what's the dollar impact. And we haven't gotten to that part yet. And I don't know if we have the information to do that tonight. So
We have some, I think it's from this year.
I
and
thought we did get
Sue,
that.
I think maybe Sue or Celeste put it together. That's for Danby students are attending Mill River this year in 7A is 7.
yeah,
Attending Long Trail's 9. And then it's for Sunderland, it's 2 to Long Trail.
But
2
we need to
Maple
marry
Street.
this with whatever the proposal's going to be, so we know what kind of financial impact we're talking about. And what's the dollar amount? Whatever the proposal's going to be, I want to keep that open. I'd love to hear what the actual proposal it is, but then I need to see what the numbers are going to say. Are we talking about a $20,000 a year total bill here, or are we talking about $300,000 or $400,000? So I don't know which end of the spectrum we're on.
Jessica?
One thing, I think grandfathering families is a nice idea. It's a good, PR piece. But I think one thing that I was kind of worried about, and get Dan's opinion on this, is later down the line, you have a family that falls under this. Is it going to look like we're giving something to someone that others aren't getting? And that kind of goes against that. It needs to be the same option for everybody.
Slippery slope to go. Yeah, because that's the only, the people that I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I meant Herb had his, I was pointing at you, but I got Herb had his hand up before, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just puzzled, Dan, is it your impression that that grandfathering an individual student would be legal, notwithstanding the fact that the only exception you've mentioned is a geographic one?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen in other mergers that the state board has done this. You know, I would say, it's been worded on, basically the students that are currently where they are now, we're gonna let them finish out. That's been approved a couple times by the state board.
Yeah.
Nancy,
It goes along with that, is because it seems to me, as far as any sort of family or siblings, the only one it would apply to is if the child is exactly 1 year younger. That, I mean, because it would be, you've got a 7th grader going into 8th grade, and if the 6th grader would then be going into 7th grade, both would be at the same middle school. But if there's more than a year apart, it doesn't.
well, not necessarily.
that's
So
the
if you,
issue.
so I had this, I'm sorry, it's a fictional scenario. I don't know
Yeah.
if you saw that, if that
I did.
helped at all. So I think this is where it applies. So
But I don't think
want me to
it
read this
should.
one more time? And just, because I think
Read what one?
this fictional scenario
No.
that I created, you don't want me to read it, okay. But I think that's where it applies,
Yeah.
Nancy.
Is
But
where-
it doesn't have to apply. I'm saying it shouldn't apply there because
Okay.
there's too big a gap. That's
Right.
my
Yeah.
point.
Right.
The only time it should apply is
Okay.
beginning with the student that's
Gotcha.
being affected.
Right.
If he's in or she is in 7th grade, they absolutely should be able to go to 8th grade. If that child has a younger sibling that would be going into 7th grade that same year, that child is going into 8th grade, that might apply as a disadvantage.
What if they have another kid in the 5th grade?
They couldn't, it has to be, they have to be, and that's why it seems like it's too, it's
Yes.
too,
Richard has his hand up.
unequal.
Yeah, and then Jay.
unequal.
Well, actually, I was going to say pretty much what you were saying, because if you go back a month or two ago, we've discussed this as far back as maybe, how far down to go down the line. And I like the cutoff point where it's going to what your point is. We have two buckets here. You got people who are going to be directly affected at the time of the merger, and then this other group of siblings.
Trailing siblings.
The trailing siblings. So where do you want to make that cutoff is really where it comes down. And I really like the idea of the 6th grader sibling of a 7th grader, because that's 1 year. You got those two kids in middle school at the same point in time. So I just want to throw that out for your consideration,
And that's
how
what-
much you want to go down that pipeline beyond 6th grade.
Yes.
Jay.
So that's what I like too, and I think the question is when is that we're wondering if we could extend that for Mill River students or Long Trail students that had. So if you have a student that's in junior high, like a
Arlington
junior in
too,
high
right?
school, then their 6th grade sibling could go into 7th grade into Mill River because they're already going to high school there. So that's what I don't like, and the reason that I don't like that is well, it creates inequity to all of the other schools in the fact that I can't choose to send my 7th and 8th graders are in different schools than my high school students are already. So these couple towns that already had Mill River, we shouldn't allow them to grandfather, and which I think what was Jen's language in the policy. We shouldn't be allowing grandfathering because you have a sibling that's in high school. It's only for middle school. So like you say, it'd be only 7th, 8th grade, and they have a sibling a year younger going for 6th and the 7th. So
Okay. So can we just, does anyone disagree with that, with this high school, looking at Arlington,
That sums it up for me.
Long Trail, and Mill River? Does anyone disagree that this grandfather clause should not apply to high school families with high school
There's
students?
a lot of double negatives in
Oh,
there.
sorry. That's why it's a fictional scenario, right?
Seventh and eighth grade.
So
Yeah,
you know,
but
7th and 8th grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
7th and 8th grade. The other sticky part about tying into families and siblings, whether the kid's in the 6th grade and he has a brother in the 5th and the 4th, is that, however preposterous you might think an arrangement is, it'll happen. That families split up, custody moves from here to there, people move from one place to another, and you think it won't happen, but it does. We saw it all the time.
well, when they're forced to do
And
something,
so,
they're forced to make it
so
work.
then you need to be really careful about,
Inequity.
they have to still live in the same town, they have to reside there, they can't move to somewhere else and still keep going. There's a lot of loopholes.
All right, Dick.
So I'm concerned about the issue Jim is, and that's cost. And so can I make an assumption at this point that no district currently, no school currently transports transports the student as a matter of their costs to something like Mill River or?
We do.
You do pay for that. So we would then have to consider the transportation costs. Is that what I'm understanding?
Depending on how I mean, if we continue, we originally said we would probably just, it'll continue the way it has been for right now, and then the new board will figure that out later.
Okay.
So that may come down the pipeline at some point where the new board is like, we can't offer transportation to Mill River.
And the last sort of issue, and I'm just not aware of, do these schools charge money? Are they like Burr Burton?
Yeah.
Which charges money, so?
Yeah.
Yeah, parents usually pay the difference.
Oh,
If
the difference.
there's a difference
long
from the
drive.
Nothing's
sending
free.
dollars and what the tuition is.
Well,
Then the
he's talking
parent.
about
Is that what you're talking about?
No, I was talking about
Transportation.
tuition and
Oh, tuition.
all the
And
other.
transportation
The town
as well.
pays for that. I mean,
So the town does pay for that.
yeah.
Not for Long Trail,
No,
though.
not for Long Trail.
Yeah,
For which
a private-
schools?
For a private school, the
Public.
district pays up to the union average unless the voters approve a higher amount. For
Well, I was
public
talking about middle
For
schools.
public, it doesn't matter. Public school, you pay the full amount. Transportation is a separate thing altogether. Sometimes towns pay for transportation, sometimes they don't.
Yeah,
You can't grandfather transportation.
Right.
You know, that's something the
Okay.
board controls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So can we then conclude that the potential costs are relatively small, given the small number of students that we're talking about in either scenario? That
I don't know that.
I don't know that.
I don't know that. No, I'd like to, again, quantify it. I mean, are we talking 10 students to go to Long Trail, right? That's
Yeah.
$15,000,
Yeah.
correct? That would leave the district?
That's a good approximation.
So 100, that's 150,000. So I mean, I don't know what those, I mean,
Well,
I'd like to just see what the numbers.
isn't it
tally
the
up to.
differential though?
No, not if they're going to a private
15
school.
is, they would pay beyond that, that would be the differential.
Right.
The district's liability would be about
$15,000.
$15,000.
Pay it one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, so
We're gonna
if
pay
I
that.
could, I mean, the financials, it doesn't really matter so much because, so as long as we can all agree that it's just dealing with the middle
Yeah.
school siblings, not going into the, whole high school thing that we were talking about. Again, I think that we're gonna have to, even if there is a cost increase, we're gonna have to take it, because for those families, that's gonna be a deal breaker for them. That could be a reason why the whole thing gets voted down. If we deny any sort of grandfathering because it makes too much of a cost difference, then, we have to at least supply grandfathering to the kids that are already there and their siblings that are gonna, be a year behind and going, so they don't. I think if we don't do that, then we're risking having to vote it down.
So beyond, we agree we do not want to disrupt the educational continuity for 7th graders at the time of the merger.
Right.
Beyond that, and looking at Sunderland, Danby, Mount Tabor here, what does the what do you think the grandfather clause should include?
Personally, I'm fine with it being cut off right there. I think it's great that you want to include the younger siblings, and I would agree with the 6th grade scenario, but I'm fine with cutting it off.
Yeah, that's what I would say the same, so it would be grandfathered, like you said, through the to
That's 2
2020,
years.
just for 2 years.
2 years
Right.
post-merger.
For
Yeah, I
the-
was going to agree, and just different, last year I had kids in 3 different schools, so as a family, you tend to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So could we
are
vote
we
on
ready
that?
for,
A motion?
So that,
Ready?
happens.
Well, is anyone
Yeah,
from
just- It is what it is.
States.
we'd also,
Danby, Danby, Mount Tabor, Sunderland, anything else you want to consider? Are you guys willing to make a motion, or are you ready for a motion?
can I just say, in your note here, it says that all of these people have no younger siblings.
So it wouldn't even really.
Anyway,
What?
your note
You mean the
says,
fictional,
noticed that too.
no, the
No,
material
that's-
from Mill
it's
River, Long
divided.
Trail, Maple, none of them have younger siblings.
But it's
So-
important
Currently,
language, just in
yeah.
case you get
But
someone who
some of the
moves
ones
in.
in
or-
Sunderland do have younger siblings.
Well, and I think,
But
That
I
would,
thought-
that would qualify if they were to have it extended.
Yeah.
Jessica?
I think it's because this is only including 7th and 8th grade, because I know that there's people in the high school portion that have younger siblings. So I think when it says no younger siblings, it's just applying to the 7th and 8th
Okay,
graders.
and they're the ones that
Today.
matter to us, right? I mean, those are the only ones we're counting on.
So there's currently no 6th graders.
Yeah.
That
7th
would,
graders.
That's,
But we're not.
There's no sixth graders that would get grandfathered because
So just
they have
in
an
this
older
year, at
sibling
this
in
point
middle
in
school.
time, right, there, just for discussion's sake, there are none this year
Right.
that if this was in effect, would benefit from this.
Right. And one,
Well, I know there's at least one family
I don't-
that has a sixth grader and a fifth grader.
Well, that,
Right now.
That's, again, this is
Hold
just.
on,
But they're
are we
not-
looking at
but that wouldn't
They're not
work.
currently.
They're not
I just
currently
put it on
on
this.
this, but they
Right.
would be
But they will
next
when it
year
goes
when
into
this goes
effect.
into effect.
Again, I'm not opposed to this concept, I'm just asking, can we quantify it so we're not making a dramatic mistake?
Yeah.
And I still haven't, the numbers are kind of floating around, we looked at them a month ago, but now we're kind of calling them into question. I'm just saying, can we quantify this?
Do you, because it'll become to a greater cost to the,
We should talk about the cost. This is a financial decision. What will it cost to the new, because once it's in, it's in. So, and that could change. You could have, but I'm still
'cause
not comfortable knowing what, are we talking about 2 or 3?
Whether the cost stays in the district
Yeah.
or the cost goes outside the
Right.
district.
it's not
Well,
gonna
if
affect the, it's not gonna affect the tax rate unless people come in, flock to there just for the grandfather clause, correct?
Well, I'm not saying that people will move there for that. I'm saying if we're sending dollars outside of the district, we don't pay our own schools once a student is in the district versus going to a private school. So if students are going to benefit from this, there'll be a financial cost. It's an expense to the new district. All I'm saying is,
Yeah.
what are we talking about? 2 students or 20? I mean, I just want to know what we're talking about.
Can I ask a question? This is kind of where you're coming from. So let's say Danby students are not going so much to Long Trail, but they're going to MEMS instead. So would that make everyone happier if we look at a provision where it only applied to grandfathering students going into that are going continuing their public school education rather than private school?
Well, that's where they would be going anyway, though, isn't it?
That's where they would go after the merger.
They would be going.
Grandfather.
Yeah, I know. After the merger,
You're saying okay, so you're saying like a student at 7th grade in Long
That's true.
Trail, right? I think we're
They
committed
don't need to be grandfathered.
okay,
yeah, I think
they're in the
Yeah,
right
they're
spot.
already in the, just,
but are we,
It's Arlington and Mill River, it sounds like, are the
Issues.
so
Are some of the bigger
the educational continuity
Well, and
piece
Maple
for that
Street.
student, we need to consider that financial cost, Jim, is what you're saying.
Well, I might be mistaken. Will this sunset in 3 years just because of the fact that we're only talking about the 6th graders moving
Yes.
up?
Yep.
Okay, it's
Yeah.
not a recurring issue.
No, no, no,
then.
No.
That's where I was thinking.
No,
this
we're
was-
sunset 2 years, I
Okay.
think what the
2020.
idea
Yeah.
was 2 years
Well, it would-
post-merger.
it would
then all
automatically
kids would be in the
sunset.
system
Okay.
without
Then
the
the
choice,
kids were-
7, 8.
But
so
it-
that would
It's
already-
this
There's
year's
another-
sixth graders,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
who next year will
Okay.
be in
We would have gone
seventh.
to analysis, but that was the point. I didn't know what the hell you were trying to do.
Okay.
So, but suppose there's another kid, suppose there's a 5th grader and a 4th grader in the same family.
No.
Does that-
No, because at
So
that
we're
point,
clear
they would
about
be
I think,
going
yes.
into this, they would
Right,
have
that's where-
lost that 7-8 choice, and they would
Right.
be going to men's, or wherever they're.
Right, right, but if
school
their
that we
siblings
send
are
them is.
still, if they've still got a sibling.
I think we're
moving
saying
up-
that
No,
it's
I think we shouldn't.
closes
Yeah, no,
2020.
that-
We're really only
High
talking
school
about people who are getting caught up in the transition
Yes.
years.
Exactly.
Okay,
Right.
and then I'll withdraw
Then they
my
have time to
request.
So
plan.
maybe we can,
Yeah.
make a motion, but maybe we need like a minute just to think about how you want to phrase that motion, right?
Well,
Dan's got to write it.
That's where let's talk about content. About
Then
We don't, he
make
doesn't
a
want our
motion,
language.
and
No, but frame the concept, the concept. No, but
Oh.
just make sure we have the concept
Oh,
right. So we don't have
okay.
to go back amending it 4 times.
Well, we
You know,
start with
let's
this-
not speak too quickly, I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, if you feel confident in making
It's
that
hard to
motion
word all that.
that's what I'm saying. We want a minute, so you can just
Write it down.
just write it down what the concept is. So let's take a minute, 2 minutes, silence, and think about what you perceive the concepts to be, so we're not amending them 40 times later.
This would be better with Jeopardy music playing in the background.
So for kids that go from Sunderland to Arlington, what's the tuition in Arlington? Just out of curiosity, does anybody know? It's got to be a lot less than 15,000 from it. No,
I think it's more.
it is.
I think it's that.
Oh, because of their inefficiencies.
It's a little hot, I can look it up.
They used to have a bill, they used to have a high bill back, now they don't have that, right?
I was given a fair
Yeah.
assessment, yeah, it's close to 17, 16.
Wow. Tuition in Dorset schools.
Smaller the school, the higher the price.
If you want to have the Dorset schools, 13,250. Or maybe it's more than that.
Well, Mill River's around that. Mill River's right around DBA's rate.
Okay.
But can I ask if all of you thought that it was okay that the kids who are currently in 7th grade be allowed to finish 8th grade and we stop there, is that enough?
I'm almost thinking
Yeah.
yes, because in your what you said about, well, what if they have more kids? It's almost nice to be like 7th and 8th grade, that's it. Unfortunately, because what if you do have a 6th grader and a 4th grader? At some point, people are going to be like, I feel like, you know what I mean?
It's not fair to me, and it's, yeah.
Where if you just do, if you're currently in 7th grade, you get to continue.
8th grade.
You're done. It's a clean line. It's
So
there's
considering
no
this affects
inequity anywhere.
Sunderland, Mount Tabor, and
I mean,
Danby
if
the
it's up
most,
to you guys, really.
would any of you be interested in making the motion? Not to put you on the spot, or?
I'm not sure. Jan, I have to defer to you in terms of Sunderland. It feels to me that just giving that one extra year is just a
I
little
think the one extra
concession,
year would be
and
nice.
just cut it off. I mean, so any student in the 7th grade with a sibling in the 6th grade are grandfathered school choice through 2020
For middle school.
for just
Sounds
7th
good.
and 8th
Second.
grade.
Well, everybody gets
Hold
it.
on.
So that's,
So,
Through the school year 1920 or the school year 2020?
Fiscal 20.
Yeah, currently in
19,
school, so
20.
they can't go if they aren't already. They don't get choice to go there unless they're already there. They're being grandfathered in the school where they're already.
Well, they have to, they're grandfathered into the school that they attend,
Yes,
which will no
current-
longer be part of choice.
Yes,
And if they have a
yes.
sibling 1 year younger in the 6th grade, that child could choose the same school.
Right.
provided
Here's-
no
here's-
one's changing schools, right? Right.
Here's some language from someplace else talking about grandfathering to the current school, okay? And then it says younger brothers and sisters will be allowed to grandfather into the current school if their older sibling is concurrently attending. So that would,
But we would have to
Oh,
make
yeah,
specify.
that
But we would have
does
to
it.
make specify
Yeah.
the 7th and
That
8th, because if
does
they're
it.
well,
attending
yeah,
Mill
well,
River.
yeah. No, I mean, we
That's
would
the
have
only
to,
place-
we
No
would
high
have to
school.
clarify it a little bit, but that's just some
That's-
interesting
that-
language from
It's much better.
somewhere.
But how many siblings
But-
down do you go?
No, just
Right.
cut.
That's
Back to that
So it's only gonna affect.
But it's gonna, we're gonna cut
Sunsets
grandfather
it.
19.
So it doesn't
If
matter.
you've
School
got
fiscal
triplet siblings,
1920s.
Right? The triplet siblings,
Right.
as long, you know what I
That'll
mean?
be the
It's-
only way you can
yeah,
extend it one
yeah.
more year,
I have language. Hold on.
Well, hold on, I think it's, I don't know, I want to give
Okay.
Danby, Mount Tabor, Sunderland an opportunity if they want to, you know, we heard this from Betsy, give them an opportunity to make that motion if they'd like, because it does affect them the most. And not, you can make the motion, I'm not shutting
That's
it
all right,
down,
I
I'm
can
just
wait.
putting that out there. Herb, go
Well,
ahead.
I like Betsy's language. The only thing we need to do is to narrow it down.
Right.
So that it only applies to students who would enter 7th grade in the first year of the merger.
Yes.
I think we've got the concept, and I know the language is important, but yeah, maybe you guys want to take some draft language and.
Well, I think-
Dan's
run it
gonna
back to
do
the-
it. He just wants to
No,
know
but I
the
mean, they're
concept.
gonna have to talk to their community members about it and make sure that it's understandable.
Well,
I think
we
that
got
is,
it.
the concurrently
What
helps
makes
a
it
lot.
clear.
Yeah.
Well,
Because that's where the language is important.
Can we get a motion to just get a point out concept, and what
Yeah.
we had said is Dan was
That's the
going
goal
to deal with
tonight,
that
yeah.
language, so we don't have to worry about language specifics.
Herb?
Just
So
do it.
then I move
Talk
we
about conceptual.
approve what Betsy just read with the addition that only applies to students who enter 7th grade in the first year of the merger.
I'd like to hear what Dick has, just, you did.
Actually,
correct, so
it's
just
students
really
entering
curiosity.
8th grade in the
Seventh
first.
and eighth.
No,
It's
no.
not,
No, the grandfathering of the student already covers that. What we're talking about is siblings, I think.
Oh, so the sibling would be entering 7th grade concurrently
So can
in
you
the
re-
first year of
Can you
merger?
repeat your
Yes.
motion here again, Herb, please? So,
It's actually her wording.
okay, so
Heard, by the way.
Betsy, can you read that one more time, please?
Well, I'm going to elaborate a little bit. So we're talking about, okay, here, in this instance, they're saying, you know, current 5th grade. So let's just apply. They're saying current 5th grade students who would be moved next fall or whatever, then the first, right, or something.
First year.
Because of the change, will be allowed to grandfather to the current school. So we would change that to be sixth grade or whatever.
Yeah.
No, 6th.
No.
Or no, 7th grade.
7th grade.
7th grade, right?
I think
Whereas
it's
the
better
younger
to just
sibling
say
currently-
grandfather students currently
Currently, well, okay, that was.
in a school no longer choice would be grandfathered for 8th grade, and a sibling who would be there concurrently.
And then
In
young,
sixth
it says
grade.
younger brothers and sisters will be allowed to grandfather into the current middle school if their older sibling is concurrently attending.
Yeah.
But we would say concurrently attending 6th grade.
No,
Well, no,
no,
just
no,
concurrently attending the school.
So
Yeah.
any,
But
when they go.
That would take into
Hold on, hold on.
consideration
I think-
7th and 8th grade.
Yeah, that.
I think, because that means, so the older one is in 8th grade and they can come into 7th grade, because so they'll both
So they'll
be
both
Right,
be
they're
there.
both concurrently
in
attending.
this school.
right.
Okay.
A 6th grade sibling who would be
But-
concurrently
But does this-
attending the same
Does
school.
that, but that also could open up so that 7th grader goes into 8th grader and there was another 6th
Yeah.
grader.
No, because we're gonna
Right.
if we're gonna say that it sunsets.
Then we have to
in-
change
Well,
concurrent
you
What
could,
if-
you could
Right.
change the concurrent then.
Through,
So I got,
for 1 year.
So, but with that, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. If we
Right?
need that sunset, because if we don't,
yeah.
right, if we had that language, then someone could send their families to the mountain schools, K through 8, and send that whole family there who attends concurrently. We're just, because we have to think out of the box of just Long Trail, which the lowest grade is 6th grade, right? So remember, this is, we tuition to any independent school that's K through 8, right?
No,
Seven, eight.
no, this is only choice for 7, 8.
Yeah, it's
Right.
only
Yeah.
70.
No, I understand that, but it's only choice for 7, 8. But you have a 7th grader, let's say, who's choosing to go to Mountain School at Winhall, right? And we want to provide that student so they can go 8th grade,
Right.
right?
That's guaranteed.
Okay,
We all agree
but
that.
with what I was just hearing, saying the siblings who are concurrently there, right? We need to put,
The sibling who would be concurrently in 7th grade when our student is in 8th grade. Not all that
just
they're.
a year younger, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
all
What you're
a year
getting
younger.
to is because
This
Long
word.
Trail has 6th grade, if
Yeah.
they have a 7th grader, they may be able to use that law to get their 6th grader there.
So it's a
Right?
year, a
Right.
sibling that's
The
a year
first
below.
year. Only.
Not
the
for
next
6th grade.
No, they
Oh,
can't
Long
get him
Trail.
into 6th grade.
Well, the way you fix what Jessica is talking about is you make this apply only to students who are in the 6th grade now, who are going to be entering 7th in the first year of the merger.
Go ahead.
I wrote, in the first year of the merger, students currently enrolled in a middle school program outside the district can continue to attend. Their siblings currently enrolled in the 6th grade could also attend that school.
There,
That narrows it down a lot more.
All right.
that's it.
Does anyone want to make a
well, he was
motion
sitting on
for
it
that?
10 minutes too.
I know, I just think it's, you want to get,
Well, it's not-
these, it affects these guys. Herb?
Is it absolutely clear that middle school means as a school?
Yeah, you can't say middle school, it has to say 7, 8. And Dan can fix it, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But the
All right.
motion is what we're doing now, and Dan will do the.
Are you getting all
The
this?
concept, we
Relying on
got.
a minute. Yeah, I got it.
No, there's,
She's shaking her head
so
laughing.
Dick threw a concept out there, you can move on it, or would anyone else like to move on it?
I'd second it.
I'll move. Could you say it again?
So hold on, he didn't motion, right?
All right.
So we had
Oh,
one
we didn't
motion on the
know
floor that was not seconded, that was Herb's, right? So we had no, did he withdraw that motion?
Is that a motion?
I'm sorry.
Fine.
Yeah, he did.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, so we withdrew, that motion's withdrawn. Now, Jen, are you
I
moving?
move that we accept Dick's.
I said middle school, but do you want to define
Seventh and
this?
eighth.
as
Yeah. 7, 8.
seventh grade?
So can you,
So can you read
Okay,
it?
in the first year of the merger, students currently enrolled in a 7th or 8th grade program outside the district can continue to attend. Their siblings currently in the 6th grade could attend that school.
That
you don't need-
sounds great, but that's only, you preface it with in the first year, because we're allowing that 6th grader to move to 7th and then 8th grade, correct?
Yes.
So,
The 6th grader in the first year of the merger
Right.
will also be grandfathered into that.
right.
Okay,
Yes, some-
If they're
Right,
siblings.
but it's not just applying to 1 year. 'Cause
Yeah,
if
so
that
the
6th
seventh
grader
grader
needs to
can be
carry
moved
through
and that-
2 years. That's, I just
Yeah,
wanted
put a
to.
sunset year of 2019, 20 or something
I'll
like
clean
that.
that up. I conceptually.
Yeah,
He's got
he
it.
gets
All
it.
right.
Okay, so he's got it.
So with possible amendments to my motion.
All right, so but we understand the concept, and Jen's
Yeah.
moved on it. Do we have a second? on it?
Second.
Okay, we have a second from her. All right. All those, any further questions, discussion?
I'm not quite sure what the motion is.
So the mo-
I'll give
The motion is to accept the language.
The concept.
The concept for current 7th graders to be grandfathered in at same school, and a sibling going into 7th grade can also be at that school.
Which is what the.
We'll get it. We'll get it.
All
We'll get it. All
I'll
right.
give it to you.
He's gonna polish it up, and that's what we're gonna vote on, right?
Well, no, we're gonna vote on the
That'll be the
concept now.
language.
The article's gonna come back later. All
We're
right.
voting on
So
the
all
concept.
those in favor of adopting the concept as proposed, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, break out the champagne.
First motion to carry and what?
Let's go back to SUSD.
All right.
Did we also
move
say?
on.
Momentum.
Yeah, we also said last time, like a family, if there's an interruption in the service, you don't get to do it, you know.
Well, family, once again,
Yeah.
I'll reduce this to
That's school
language.
closure.
Okay.
Don't get so excited.
Okay. School closures, keep it going.
Okay.
All right, school closure. So the language, you know, well, we agreed on the initial concept about 3/4 of the new merge board would need to approve that. So again, coming back to,
That was Article 3 and 4.
well, I've seen it put different places. I've seen it put in article.
Yeah, just concept.
Yeah,
concept.
yeah.
Don't
So,
worry about it.
Are we
It's
still
where-
sticking with this
concept.
basic?
so well, let's just, we started with 3/4, right? And let's just start there. We agreed on 3/4 of the new board. Beyond that 3/4, and again, looking at, Mount Tabor, Sunderland, and Danby, beyond that 3/4 majority, what do you believe that clause needs, the article needs? Yes.
A community forum and an advisory vote by the towns affected.
Reform and advisory vote. Yes, Jay.
So, I think that we'd already agreed to all that stuff previously as well, this whole advisory vote, the public forum, and what actually held up us having any actionable thing was Bill Beauregard, who Herb has replaced, wanted to put language about reorganizing schools in the closure. And that put a stall on that whole thing,
Yeah.
but if we can just, with what they said about the public forum and an advisable vote, I think we'd all agreed on that previously.
Yeah.
So a town that didn't want the closure just gets together with the town father and said, don't hold a vote, because they can't do it until the vote is held.
Oh.
It's just an advisory vote, though.
Yeah, it's just.
There's no vote.
But if the vote has to be held, I see what you're saying.
Oh, so
You
the
said it again,
language
I'm sorry, I'm
can't
not
say it has to
understanding.
happen.
Huh.
You said it again, I'm not
That's a good one.
understanding.
There's a politician in our midst.
If the town fathers didn't want the closure to happen,
Yeah.
they just don't declare a vote. So they never hold a vote.
So an option.
And since a vote is
They can be
required,
petitioned to have the vote.
hmm?
They can be petitioned to hold the vote.
or so,
They can't not hold the vote.
Yeah.
can they be petitioned by somebody
Other than-
out of the town, outside the town?
Well, it's a district.
Well, it's
Yeah,
a district, so.
well,
It's a dis-
yeah, it would be interesting because I'm thinking of Courier, because the voters in that case are the Courier voters. They're not, so when I craft this, I'll have to think about the voters of the district, basically, not the voters of the town.
Okay, district, yeah.
But in this case, the town districts will be dissolved, as will the union districts. They won't exist anymore.
The district wouldn't
So
be
it would be the
allowed.
town. So we'd want language about the combined voters of Mount Tabor and Danby having an advisory vote.
Can you just-
But I would just word it as they have that opportunity. If they don't do it,
Reserve the
that's their
right-
problem.
reserve-
you know?
Reserve the option.
Right, I was gonna say, we'll be
Yes.
invited to a reserve the
Yeah,
option
invited
to
to,
provide an
yeah, that's
advisory.
mandatory.
So we
Yeah,
got
that's good.
Yeah,
reserve
that's
the
good.
option for an advisory vote, right? Does that sound good,
Yeah.
guys?
Oh, they
That-
may
all right,
have-
and that there's a community forum prior to the vote. Beyond that, are we
And then a 3/4 vote on the board.
3/4 vote? We've had that before.
Which
Herb?
is the challenge.
I'll be the voice crying in the wilderness. Mount Tabor's opinion has not changed because its representative has changed.
Oh,
Oh, but I agree with you too, is I think, but it doesn't go in this article. It's a separate, when we craft school, changes in school grades, is we would add the same language if the board is gonna vote on changes of grades. Because Sunderland could also have its 6th grade taken away or moved somewhere else, or its 5th grade.
So Article 1, I believe, gets into, I think it's Article 1 gets into the grades operated by.
Doesn't matter which are. Just get
No, I'm just,
Yeah,
I'm just
the
telling them that
concept.
we don't have, we can, there's
Yeah.
another place where we
Break
can
it
come
up.
to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
also, nothing closes within the first 4 years, which is the
Well,
law,
that's-
but we
Well,
should
that's
restate
law.
it.
Unless there's an actual.
First full year pertains to closure, not to
Right.
grade configuration.
Right, no, but we should restate it even though, it's in the law.
Yeah.
motion ready.
So do we, anyone,
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Is the forum held before the advisory vote or before the board vote?
Should be, well, everything should be before the board vote, I would imagine.
I just was wondering if it mattered.
yeah, I think with
Forum,
the,
advisory vote, board
Yeah.
vote.
Yeah, that's what I would see would be most logical.
Do we have to specify that then?
In that order.
Concept. Got it.
okay. All
I
right.
like it, Dan.
So,
Keep it going.
all
Can you
right,
make
so
them-
do we,
So,
Can I
again,
make
do we have a motion to?
I move that in order for a school to close, that and a forum be held in a town which might be affected, that an advisory vote may be taken, and that the board be required to vote a 3/4 majority to make that closure.
So everything except for the part about the forum being in the town of the, it should be as a public forum for the entire district. It shouldn't just be.
Okay.
I feel like we should just motion not such a complicated language, just motion something on.
Concept, he's gonna write it.
No, I think it should be in.
So, I'm sorry, what was,
Yeah.
how'd you disagree with?
Well, just because
vote
when he
should be
said
at
specific
town.
language, he talked about a forum in the town of the closure, but we need to have a public forum in the entire district. I mean, that's why I want to avoid such
Okay.
specific
So
language, just a
can we-
motion to
do you
accept the
understand what he's-
concept.
I do, but since the board needs to hear from the people who are gonna be most dramatically affected, I didn't want the whole district, the whole district could be invited to the forum.
But in the sense
Public
that
should be
there's
in
the multiple
we
towns.
got like, if
It's
Floodbrook,
Floodbrook that's
Yeah.
the hard part.
that's not, that's a lot of
Well,
towns.
I would just say a public forum in the affected school.
Okay.
I mean, anybody's
that's fine.
gonna
I
be
accept
able to
it.
come.
In the affected school,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, but
that's
have
where
the
the
forum
location
there.
is. Yeah,
It's
that's
gonna
a
be,
good idea.
if you're gonna close the Dorset school, have the forum in the Dorset
people
school.
wanna close and
But
walk in
anybody
the
can
school.
come and speak.
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
Would you like to
Yes.
withdraw your
accept it.
motion and then?
I accept the change.
Okay.
And who vote, what's
Okay.
the advisory vote then of the whole district?
No,
The
just
board.
It's
The new
the town.
The
school
affected
district
towns.
board.
Directly
No,
affected.
the advisory
The
vote, not
advisory
the
Okay, how about we do
final.
this? So,
Wouldn't be-
Dick, I think we're right there, rather than going through amendments. Can you just withdraw?
I withdraw it.
And then restate it? Would you like? Well, I think it's important, we want
I'm
to, you
usually
know.
good for
think we
one
got
of these. You start adding stuff and I then complicate the motion.
Or you don't have to, there's someone else, we're right there, we're right there.
I move that in order to close a school, that there be a 3/4 vote on the district board to close that school after a forum is held at the school being affected and in the community that attends that attends that school.
Well, that doesn't say advisory.
Advisory
Okay.
vote.
Can I give
An advisory vote in the community?
In the community.
And with an advisory vote in the community, all right.
And can the advisory vote be held at this forum? Is it a hands thing, or is it a?
I think
does
advisory
it-
vote is like an election
Well,
meeting that the
held by
town
the
would hold.
town clerk.
It could be a
Yeah.
floor.
Yeah, so
floor
we'll,
vote.
yeah, that's conceptual, you know,
Okay.
that's the details. All right, and a second for that motion.
Second.
All right.
Yeah.
Any- We're ready to vote, all right.
I do have to make a suggestion. I think you need to be clear about whether that 3/4 is 3/4 of members present or 3/4 of the full board.
I think we already
We
decided.
already
Yeah,
decided
10 to
15.
Yeah.
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 We said 10 of
So,
So is the
all right,
full board.
all those in favor of
Appoint them.
approving
The
the
concept.
motion, the concept, excuse me. Passes.
Motion
Approving the
for
concept,
concept.
approving the concept as presented, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Expect that. All right. All right. So
Can
Okay.
you say why?
Mount Tabor would like an arrangement the same that Timoth has.
Well, we actually already, I mean, we did vote on.
I know you've
on
been
the-
through all that, but I'm not going to vote for it.
Okay. All right.
That's okay. Because Mount Tabor, a relatively small community, as we've been reminded, has issues, and we want to make sure that we address those issues.
I think
in
Bill,
the con- in the
Bill
concept.
addressed them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, well, what else we got here? Wow, that was 2 motions.
Transportation, language?
No, wait, that's not on the agenda.
You didn't put it in the agenda.
We got, look at it, it's 8:10, this is amazing.
Oh, I was going through
All right, so
Dan's
we,
list.
so one thing I will say, you wanna go Red SD, you wanna come back to that? I was joking, I'm joking too. All right, so, one thing I will say before our next meeting date is, proposed for October 13th at Dorset School. And then we were gonna have a forum as MEMS that day, but we'll change it. Because that's more than most people can get to.
What day of the week is that?
Thursday, October 13th. And that's at Dorset School. And other reminders here. Like that's it. So one thing before our next meeting, I believe that we start to brainstorm and think for our next meeting the name of the merged district. All right. So on our list, still on our list, our deal breaker list, right? Is we have grandfathering's off our list. School closures done.
Right.
Preservation of school choice. I don't think that's. That's not something we're gonna necessarily resolve. Resolving, transportation, assets and liabilities, and the name, right? So those are coming up.
Need the generography. That's. I'm just, the only reason I'm bringing is transportation.
Is there
so we
anything
can-
as representatives of Sunderland that, so transportation is one concern?
I'm just saying transportation, I'll let Jen speak since she's on the board, I'm not.
And I
If
think
it's appropriate.
the assets and liabilities for Sunderland is also an important topic.
Well, the transportation is only because of the fact, well, I don't know, I'm not the board representative.
Okay.
It's not appropriate for you to talk about the board planning to have a transportation policy that would be grandfathered?
I think
Or
at this
that's-
time, I don't know all of the specifics. I think we're still getting details on that.
Oh,
So
okay.
I don't know if we have that all worked out. I'm looking to see.
All right, it
Because
is.
I'm not sure if it's all worked out.
Your control over transportation is very nominal. Essentially,
It would,
you're proposing a first-year budget of operations, that's about it.
yeah.
You can put some recommendation, you can do that kind of thing, but really that's a purview of the new school board.
Right.
So,
In other words, I'm saying that you would be grandfathering in something that you don't know about now,
But-
if you decide to grandfather.
you can't, this committee can't grandfather transportation.
But recommend that be
You can
grandfathered,
recommend that things
recommended
stay-
that be
you can recommend
continued
any-
status quo
Yeah,
or
but that's
whatever.
really up to the new
I
board.
updated the transportation document. You haven't distributed it to the group.
Yep.
And since there may be several people who cannot attend, if you can do that sooner, then Nancy, if you're not able to be here, Elizabeth, if you're not able to be here, then you can look at it and forward your comments.
Yep, and so, so we have Dick's language and along, and Dan's recommendation in that doc was...
But my motion, but the transportation statement doesn't preclude anything that Dan said.
Yeah, okay. Yes, sir.
If we're going to get into, I don't know whether assets would include things like trust funds, reserves and so forth. I think it'd be useful if we, ahead of the meeting, got some definition about whether we have any freedom of action regarding those things anyway. I'm sorry, I can't attend, but at least I could see that ahead of time and make a comment.
And as I suggested before, your articles of agreement will most likely be something to the effect, any assets and liabilities of the districts on midnight of June 30 will become assets and liabilities of the districts the next day. And that gives the districts a year to figure out what assets and liabilities are going to be transferred to the new district. So we see that pretty common pattern where districts working with one district are working through should they sell their building to the district or not. They know by date certain, if they don't, it will become property of the new district because that's what the articles are.
Jim?
So I mean, that language really couldn't be changed very much without running afoul of some statute, right?
Right. I mean, you're basically just really, you have to own everything unless it's diverted to some other place.
Or you
everything
spend
that
it
isn't
first.
diverted, you can't divert liability so much. But
So I guess we're saying that for for transportation and assets and liabilities, it's not really anything big. And we can make recommendations for what we have to do. There's not much wiggle room for, it's not much innovation.
yeah, well, I would think of too, sort of Dick has an embellished description of this. That's, I would say, go back to the two documents you're producing. Your articles of agreement, there isn't any wiggle room, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to want to list out what assets. I mean, the district's going to operate these schools, and you'll have a statement about assets and liabilities becoming property of the district after a year. Your report, on the other hand, can and should include more analysis for the voters. Here are the assets of the districts. Here are da-da-da-da. We expect this community will do that. We're going to ask the voters to create reserve funds set aside for these specific buildings. So these assets, you could give some description and context for people in your report.
Yep.
So I guess that's the sort of thing I was hoping we could get ahead of time.
Yeah. So it's worthy of your discussion,
Yeah.
to kind of, and there are some issues, as we know. I mean, Sunderland has a reserve fund, Mount Tabor has a reserve fund, Mount Tabor Danby have some trusts that are ambiguous. We have some real estate in Manchester that probably needs to be diverted. There's going to be the questions of the buildings themselves. So these are things really the school boards need to be deliberating on, as the fall goes on. They really need to understand. And I think it's important this committee understand what you're intending to do, because there's a tendency to initially say, well, we're not going to throw our thing into this kitty. We love our beloved building. Or you might have something in your original deed that says you can't sell it without, some acknowledgement from a trust or something like that. But I think over time people are like, well, let's throw it all in there anyway. But there's always interesting things. I mentioned that one district owned a graveyard. That they had to sell it to the town. That's happening right now. So you never know what we're going to find. We do have to do a title search on all your assets. Real estate.
Okay, so any other info that we might need moving into the next meeting?
I read the proposed rules for alternative districts. There's a whole lot of data that you need to provide. All the grade level information, student performance information, student-teacher ratio, staff-student ratios, on and on and on. Is that doable, or do we need to, what do we do about that? Do we get started on that stuff, or what?
You've charged me to write a report, so unless you change your mind, I will gather that information.
Oh, all right.
That gets back to the SUSD.
Yeah, but it's a long list.
There's a lot more requirements from what I see.
And that's really, this is a moving political target right now, but really the intention, I think, of them signaling that was to shoot what's the term?
Shot
Something
over
across
the
the
bow.
bow
Yeah.
Shot across
of
the bow.
districts who are seeking to maintain what they have and are seeking
Yeah.
for a way to
Oh, I
demonstrate
see.
that through their
But-
self-study.
yeah.
You know, so the state board's saying, no, we're gonna have you.
But when
Talk
we,
about that.
when we did the red the last time, we had to do all that anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, Richard was our demographer,
Right.
and we counted
Yeah.
babies and all that stuff.
Yeah, that was the traditional 706.
Right, right, right.
That's because under 706 traditionally you were gonna build a school and have to pay for money.
Right, right, and it was useful information, actually. It's,
All right.
And we have a phase one that's very
Okay.
helpful.
Remember, this is a proposed rule. Representative
right.
Olson can probably fill you in on what the comment period is, but it isn't set in stone yet. If you feel strongly about something, you
I
can
invite
go
you to do that.
testify
Takes
about
about
it.
8 months, so.
but we'll be done before that,
Well,
so.
that's my
Public comment on the
All right.
36 itself.
So anything else you would like to see? So we have these. We have. Those
Are there any
items.
particular parameters with respect to the name? That
I
we
just
should
keep it.
consider?
That's what we need to kind of brainstorm coming. I don't want to really get into it tonight because we didn't put it on the agenda. But it's considering.
You asked what information we needed, and that was the third item.
For the parameters, I don't know. How do we?
Stay away from
Inclusive, yeah. How is it inclusive?
things that might offend different groups.
Yeah.
Right, right, nothing
So
else.
Northshire itself is not too inclusive, right?
Okay.
So how do we be? I think negative is the right word.
I
All
like
right.
short names too. Short is good.
Sure.
How about the big red?
Big red sort of words.
But giant
I think
We don't.
something's being.
Oh, yeah.
I just wonder when everybody is, because
Yeah. So who has forums booked for October? We were October 13th. We'll have to change it. So
We were going to the select board
We
meeting.
are scheduled
On
in
the
October to
13th.
meet
Okay.
at the,
So we won't be here.
Oh, right, oh, yeah, we're going to
And that
meet at
that
Club
date's set in
13th.
stone, the 13th?
yeah. So I'm wondering if 13th. We should,
here either.
I won't be here, I've got a problem.
oh wow.
Did we look at
Did you guys fill out that?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Filled it out.
Yep.
Okay. So maybe we should look.
Three
at
of us will be able to
We
get a
just
lot
raised our
done.
hand if we're gonna be.
Except,
Yeah.
like,
So raise your hand if you're going to be here for the
12
13th.
people said yes, so maybe it's somebody that's
Yeah,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Huh? We don't really have a.
with Jim Lind
We
and
got-
who
we got
else?
somebody not
Manchester
here ago
and,
that said they were
Kim
coming. Maybe
Efford.
you've got a whole.
She doesn't make it on Thursdays.
Can't do Thursday. So let me. Okay, I'll look into October 13th again.
You can send us emails if somehow some compiler made a mistake.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll look at it again.
Well, it could be also those people that aren't here all
Yeah.
said yes for the 13th.
Okay.
Okay, so
Because there were 12 people that said yes.
Ed,
I was left confused about assets and liabilities. Are we going to be considering that? Are we going to be getting a list of these from the different districts? Or is this something we should be alerting the district boards for them to consider? Where does that stand?
I think Dan said that they should be alert. They should be mindful of it, and
You were
that we
provided,
don't
I
really
think,
do much.
I gave you some basic information at one point about the balance of reserve funds, the insured value of buildings. That's sort of the limited scope of that sort of analysis. What we have to do next is, do title searches and things like that.
So I
beyond
can.
that.
Yeah.
So
But you
Irv, I
have
can
some-
get that for Irv.
You have some
old
basic
one.
information
Yeah.
that was provided several months ago, on the basic assets of the community.
So the school boards are aware of this?
Yes.
Yeah, I assume so. That's, that's one of the functions Jackie has, is to go back and forth.
Okay.
So I
And she
think
has done that.
Yep.
All right, Rich.
I just want to see if we're at the point, because I'm looking at what's on the agenda for next time. Are we at the point where we could actually schedule on the agenda a vote, whether it's advisable to merge? Because I'm finding a lot of these issues are going to be, I think, bang, bang pretty quick. Because I know you like to go into greater detail, but that's not our charge on some of these issues. So that's what I want to throw out there. Is that something you think you might want to consider for that next meeting? Hopefully we'll have enough people.
Like more than 8 people.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
We-
given that the Danby and Mount Tabor, two Danby and Mount Tabor reps won't be there on the 14th, 13th, like that would.
And some.
But if we can find another date
date.
potentially
Yeah.
where we have some representation from each community, right? Would you be ready for an advisable vote then?
And does that include necessary and advisable? Is that part of that decision?
No. No. That's just if we think it's advisable to merge or not. So if we can, yeah.
The only thing I'm thinking of process-wise, we've advertised a certain amount of community engagement on this, so as long as, I would just is make sure you've gotten some feedback from people around that. You know, if you're doing, I don't know what the status is of community engagement, but if you put that into your list of things to talk before, listen, I think in the next 2 weeks, we're going to be asked to vote advisable or not. What do you think we should do? You know, I know we're going to flesh this out a little bit more, but you know, ask people in your communities if you think it's a good idea.
So maybe we push back that October 13th meeting a little bit, and we try to get our community engagement in our communities before then, and then we can, you know, knock these off. Or, you know, maybe the following week. Is that, do we see any reason to have a meeting before then? You know, with these smaller items.
I just continue to think we keep going down the road that, we want to keep this together. I don't know why it's so important to have a formal vote on it.
Yeah, that's what I don't get, is why do we need to have a vote on it? I mean,
well, I think
at some point you have to.
Yeah, that's part of it.
but I mean, we don't need to, why don't we just finish everything up and then vote on it? What's the big deal? Like, what is it, why do we need to push it ahead?
State, I just don't.
I think it's a signal.
Well, we're still here. I mean, we're still meeting, isn't it? I mean, I just think that
It just seems kind of like putting the cart in front
What's
of the
our other
horse for
choice?
public relations.
like we're going
Really?
until we're not.
I mean, that's all. Yeah.
We could take a straw vote rather than a formal vote.
I mean, I think it's safe to say that we can all agree that if someone asks us what the merger committee is feeling, that the merger committee is feeling that of course we have to do it.
Yeah.
What else choice do we have? That's the whole argument for
because
voting
we're
for it.
studying all these
Other
issues
choice.
that are quote unquote deal breakers. That's the whole point of this. So I mean, if it's not something that you feel is important, then why are we looking at these deal breaker issues? That's what I keep coming
Because there
around.
are deal breakers in our towns.
Yeah.
And we do represent the towns. And so the resolution of some of these issues, for example, the grandfather issue that we dispense with, was a potential real deal breaker. And we needed to have some semblance of continuity. Transportation for some people is a very important issue. It needs to be clarified. The name, you know,
So
we'll be number
let's see what
one.
it is.
So we're the number one deal breaker.
Jay?
I think that the whole reason that I think that it's best to put off is because what we're dealing with here is not whether or not it's advisable. I mean, I think we're all going to agree that it's advisable. What we need to deal with is what's the best way to present this to the public so that they'll vote yes on it. And in the get the words out here. In the perception that the public will have of us, if we vote that it's advisable in the middle of our meetings and then continue to have meetings to flesh it all out for like another month, then that seems like, well, boy, they just voted on a while ago that they were going to do it, and then they just decided to flesh everything out. It seems like they had preconceived notions. Why don't we let them flesh it out, and then, because what we need, we're fleshing it out just to figure out the best way to get the public to vote yes. So the best way for them to perceive that is that we've been working on this, and then we're going to finally, once it's all fleshed out, that's when we say yes or no. Because it just looks better, like it looks like a more clean, transparent political process.
Okay.
And that's what we're going for.
All right.
I mean, I think we can all agree that it has to be done.
Yeah, I agree with Jay. I mean, you don't want to have a public forum with a lot of questions, and the answer is, well, we haven't taken that up yet.
Yeah.
All right, so
And we've already
we also
decided to merge.
a couple other things. All right, so we'll keep that right now. The way things are, we'll keep that October 13th meeting, okay? And we'll do the we'll look at it again, but then we'll keep a meeting next few weeks and do transportation and what was it, the other one?
The name.
The name, right?
Name and
assets and liabilities.
Transportation, assets, liabilities, right? And then at some point we have to do first year operations and advisable versus necessary.
Is first year operations actually a budget? Did
Yeah,
you say
you
that
have to-
before? We actually
You
do,
have to draft out a first year of operations budget.
like along the lines of what your higher level thing that you showed us was?
Yeah, it's not it can be
Yeah.
like a summary budget,
But, right.
but you have
It's-
to put it together. It kind of just shows that
Okay.
you've thought about everything.
Okay,
that's
the real
involved.
point is to
And it
try
gives
to
the
come up with a
voters-
number.
It gives the voters an idea of
Okay,
what's going
that's
to
fine.
happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
The assets and liabilities, we saw on a sheet, the person in our community is more interested in the planned maintenance or deferred maintenance and not so much worried about our own self. As like you said, we got to worry about what to do with your assets and liabilities. But if you're going to merge with a lot of other schools, what liabilities are we accepting? I think we have an idea maybe of some of the debt, but is there considerable deferred maintenance any place?
Yeah.
That was the question.
That's a
that the-
hard one to quantify. I mean,
Yeah.
you can,
Well-
but if you know the age of the building, and you can say MEMS has a lot, the bigger the building, the age of the building.
Well, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying that if we could have that language so that when we talk in the community,
Sure.
knowing that question
Okay.
is definitely going to be asked, is we can.
Yeah. The good way to say it to people is honestly, it's your liability right now. It's a statewide funding system,
Right.
you just don't know. I mean, you're paying for it now, right?
Well, I mean, and
Yeah.
that's a good answer
Yeah.
then, but
Right.
that's what I mean, just having.
All right, so,
That's just,
I was going to say, I'm on the board here, and Jackie came to our meeting, and we discussed all that. And the advice is that, if you have some deferred maintenance, now's the time to do it. I mean, you use your money and do it now.
Well, I
because-
know if you've
Well,
got
that's for the
money, it is.
discussion.
That's not the concern. If you
Yeah.
got money, we'll do
Nobody has the
it.
money.
Yeah.
We're concerned about the people that
yeah.
don't have
That's in
money,
the
and where are they
basement.
gonna
Right.
get the money?
Right.
but that's.
Right.
And how soon is it gonna be a
Those
district
age-old
issue?
problems are not solved.
Yeah. So, for
Okay,
example,
so-
we're thinking about doing a pellet boiler because there are funds due to decommissioning of Yankee. We happen to be in that county and, all that.
Yeah.
So, we're really looking at doing that because we have the money to do it, and that in the
Right.
long run would save all of us money, so we're gonna do it now.
all right, so let's move on here in a bit. Yes.
I just have one of the information on a document we received in the packet, the pros and cons on supervising unit versus supervising district under special education. More challenging to manage across 4 counties and large geographic area, and the district is easier to manage in 2 counties and more centralized structure. I was just interested in why counties are specified under special education. Is there some legal intricacy involving counties?
Yeah, I think because the special ed is the responsibility of the supervisory union, and we've made that transition here. So if you were to form your own SD, your own supervisory union, if it was just these districts, your responsibility, these districts only sit in 2 counties right now.
4 we're in Windsor
Oh,
County.
I'm sorry, yes.
And
you're all over.
Londonderry's in Wyndham County, and
Yeah.
Land Grove is in Rutland
We got
County, and you
everybody.
guys are in
We got
Bennington
everybody.
County, so we've still
But
got
there
4
is
counties.
so maybe there's no difference there, because particularly when it gets to early education, we've created what's allowed under Act 62 to create a boundary around our early education region. When we get into special ed issues related to early education, parents can essentially have school choice with early education, and if we have a placement that's in Brattleboro, because that's where a parent commutes to work and they choose to put their child in a daycare center in Brattleboro, we could have an obligation to staff an IEP meeting in Brattleboro. So there is a connection between sort of our size, and that county thing, we drafted around the early ed issue as an approach. So there is something there to be said about that.
Right.
But I think at the time we were thinking of maybe some other configurations. But yeah, the same 4 counties are involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have 4 counties, whole southern part of the county.
Okay, so I think we're maybe the first time ever we got out here a little early. Public comment, Oliver, any final thoughts?
Just 2 quick things. One is, if you haven't already seen, I highly recommend reading the merger study report for the islands, Grand Island districts, which is very similar, a lot of very similar issues. I heard, for example, the trust fund issue. They have an extensive section on how they're dealing with their trust funds and some of those towns. So a lot of the issues you guys are grappling with, they've already been there, and you might find some quick answers, and it will help shortcut some of your discussions.
Grand Island?
Yeah.
Great, yeah.
The state is saying that report, and the 2 that were just recently done, Addison Northeast and Grand Isle, are good examples for you to look at what they're expecting in this phase of merger. So they're holding those up as really good examples.
Yeah.
Send them to us.
I mean, pretty much every issue you guys have discussed tonight is addressed in their document. They've already been through it, so I think you'll find it really helpful. And then just a quick comment is, a little bit of legislative intent around this whole preferred structure versus the alternative structure. The alternative structure was designed for areas like this. The legislature recognized that because of the differences in operating grades in regions like this and up in the Northeast Kingdom, that the preferred model, the SD model, was not going to work, and that's why the alternative structure was put in place.
to Dan's point, what they don't want to have happen and why they put in some of these hurdles is they don't want school districts that have an opportunity to merge and have this, because they operate at the same grade levels, say that they don't want to merge because they just want to keep doing what they're doing and they're going to try to find some way around it. They don't want those districts using the alternative structure, and that's why in the law itself there are words to the effect that, you know, the goal is to unify around the smallest practicable number of districts. And when you read that in conjunction with Section 4 of Act 46, which explicitly states that no district can be forced to give up that operating, non-operating, choice, non-choice construct, that's, you know, all of those things play together. So I don't want you guys to get hung up on the whole preferred district thing. I see that happen, and I really would encourage you not to get hung up on it.
Thank you. So, next week or so, Richard, Dan, Jackie and I will talk, and we'll talk about the agenda for the next meeting, and we'll give you some, you know, maybe we'll keep October 13th or not, but we'll review that. Do you have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.